Hello everyone, I am MANO Scaling, and I am here to help you today. I know you use this video to fall asleep, so before that, please like the video and subscribe to the channel, and also tell me where you are from and what time you are watching. Now get comfortable and relax. My name is Mark Tiller. I'm 32 years old, and this happened to me in late October of last year, during a time when I believed that a break from civilization might cure my gnawing depression. I went out to Pickett CC Memorial State Park, near the Kentucky border in Tennessee, to spend a few days off the grid with my cousin Tyler Ty Bain, his girlfriend Sierra James, and my dog Rusty. I never expected that I'd leave feeling like I'd stepped out of a nightmare, or not leave at all, depending on how you interpret everything that followed. I just quit my job in Nashville. My brain was stuck in a cycle of anxiety, regrets, and memories of a bad breakup that I still couldn't shake. Ty had called me out of the blue after years of near silence and offered a trip that he claimed would fix my head. He wanted to show me an isolated part of the park that few hikers bothered to visit. "It's unbelievably pretty," he said over the phone. "No noise from highways, no phone towers, no idiots. It's called Whistle Hollow, on account of the way sound travels out there." He promised it'd be a simple off-trail exploration, just 3 nights in the wilderness. I would come back a new man. That's how he put it. So I agreed. Sierra James, Ty's girlfriend, ended up joining us last minute, and I brought Rusty, my 5-year-old lab mix, since I couldn't bear to leave him at a kennel. When we set out, we had enough provisions for a few days, plus a backup plan for emergencies. Ty's satellite phone, which he kept in the glove compartment of his battered truck. He insisted we wouldn't need it, but we took it anyway. Rusty perched in the passenger seat next to me. I remember passing the battered sign marking the state park boundary and feeling the tension in my chest loosen a bit. Nature does that. I was actually hopeful for the first time in months. We arrived at a dirt turnaround late in the afternoon, parked the truck and loaded up. Ty had a battered old rucksack with a bedroll strapped to the top. Sierra wore a bright, bohemian-style shirt, her hair pinned in a messy bun. I strapped on my new Osprey pack, thinking I looked like some earnest novice about to discover the reality of hiking. We each carried about 3 days' worth of food, or so we thought. I also had a small collapsible bowl for Rusty and dog kibble in airtight bags. As soon as we started walking, I noticed how quiet the place was. No hum of cars, no voices from other hikers, not even bird songs. Just the soft rush of wind across tall pines. Every now and then you'd hear a distant call that might have been a crow or an owl, but it echoed weirdly, almost like the forest was stretching the sound out. It got stranger when we reached the ridge that Ty called Whistle Hollow. We paused to catch our breath. Sierra produced her phone, trying to record the view, but the screen stayed black. She cursed at it, some glitch maybe, and shoved it back into her pocket. Ty teased her that she was too reliant on technology, which was rich coming from the guy who used to text me daily about random nonsense before he fell off the grid. Rusty trotted around, sniffing tree trunks, occasionally glancing up like he was hearing something we couldn't. I didn't think much of it. By sundown, we pitched our tents and set up a small fire ring in a little clearing near a sandstone bluff. The forest was especially thick around us, with tall pines and broad oaks tangled in vines. Firewood was easy to find. Ty showed me the best way to stack it for a quick flame. But as soon as we tried to light it, the flames sputtered and went out. I'm no Eagle Scout, but I've camped enough to know when tinder's too wet. Except everything was bone dry, and the paper we used was doused in lighter fluid. The flame would catch for a second, flicker, turn green, then die. Finally, after about 15 minutes, it caught enough to produce a small but steady burn. Sierra murmured something about the forest's energy being off. Then she pulled out her phone again, turning on an EMF app that she liked to toy around with. Ty rolled his eyes. I found it silly too, but hey, live and let live. She kept insisting something was messing with the readings, though. Over dinner, simple sandwiches and some jerky we shared with Rusty, Sierra told us local legends. A shape-shifting entity that mimics voices, sightings of ghostly women calling from the ridgeline, and so on. She said the park's nickname was Whistle Hollow, because people had reported hearing their own names whistled back at them in the dark. Ty joked about it, but I could sense a tension in him. He'd grown up around these parts. Maybe the old stories had lodged in his mind more deeply than he cared to admit. I wasn't sure if I believed any of that. I just wanted to be away from my self-destructive thoughts for a while. But it didn't help that my phone had died. I checked it one last time around 9 p.m., and it was at 60% battery. Then it blinked off, refused to turn back on, like the battery had vanished. I thought maybe the cold was draining it, but the temperature was mild, nowhere near freezing. We huddled around the fire, forcing small talk as darkness closed in. Without the phone, I couldn't even distract myself by playing a game. An hour later, things started to get weird. Rusty abruptly lifted his head, ears perked, and let out a low growl. Then I heard it. A high-pitched whistle from deep in the forest. Another answered from behind us. Ty looked uneasy. "It's a bird," he said. I'd never heard a bird whistle like that. "Sure," I said, not wanting to argue in front of Sierra. But the whistling continued, slow and deliberate, moving around us like something circling. Each time, Rusty's hackles rose a little more. The hair on my own arms stood on end. The whistling sounded almost human, forming a short, repeating pattern that teased like a child calling, "Come here, come here." When we finally zipped ourselves into our tents, Sierra insisted on sharing a tent with Ty. She refused to sleep alone. I let Rusty snuggle in with me, partly for warmth, partly for the comfort of another living creature. For a while, we just lay there listening. Nothing but a distant crackle from the dying fire. Then the wind picked up, moaning through the trees. I started to drift off. In that liminal space between wake and sleep, I could have sworn I heard voices. "Are you alone? Are you sure?" I jerked awake. Rusty was trembling, but silent. My watch read 2 a.m. I tried to calm him with a pat, but my heart was pounding so loud it almost masked the hush of the forest. Eventually, though, sleep overtook me. In the morning, I unzipped the tent to find the fire pit empty of ash, like the flames had never burned. That was weird, but I could still smell smoke, so I chalked it up to maybe the wind scattering the ashes. Ty was already up, rummaging around with a scowl. He pulled down a backpack from high in a tree. Sierra's bag. It was zipped shut, empty, and dangling from a branch about 15 feet off the ground. "Sierra, did you do this?" he asked. She looked both amused and horrified. "How would I even get it up there?" she said, pointing out that the tree trunk was too smooth to climb. We found the contents of her bag, snacks, water bottles, arranged neatly in a circle at the base of the trunk. None of it looked tampered with. It was just relocated somehow. I tried to use the GPS on my phone, but it was still dead. Ty's phone was completely offline too. Sierra's wouldn't turn on. Ty shrugged and said we had his truck's sat phone if we truly got in trouble, though that was back where we parked, miles away. He proposed we do a thorough day hike deeper into the forest. I was reluctant. I wanted to figure out how Sierra's bag ended up in a tree, but Ty insisted we'd find better camping spots with a source of running water. "We can't spook ourselves first day out," he said. I gave in. Maybe the wind had somehow gotten hold of it, or Sierra walked in her sleep. None of it made sense, but I needed some semblance of normalcy. So we packed up, forging deeper into the park. The trail we followed wasn't official. Ty had discovered it years ago, he claimed. The further we went, the more uneasy I felt. The sky was overcast, but it felt heavier than normal. At one point, we emerged onto a narrow ridge with a breathtaking view of the valley below. Tall pines, swirling mist, but it was eerily silent. I realized I hadn't heard a single bird that morning. Rusty walked at my side, tail low. Usually he'd sniff and bark at every critter. Now he just stared ahead, as if following some silent signal. Things escalated around midday when we stopped for a break. I reached into my pack for a granola bar, only to find a black, pulpy mess. It smelled rancid, like rot. My water bottle was half empty with muddy-looking liquid. Furious, I checked everything else. More mold, more sludge. What the hell? Sierra had the same problem. The jerky was soggy and turning green. Even the dog kibble stank like swamp water. Ty's rations, unbelievably, looked fine. He offered to share, but we'd lost probably 80% of our collective supplies. He stared at us like we'd done something foolish, but we were as perplexed as he was. We decided we'd fill up on water from a creek if we found one, boil it, and maybe try to live off the land for a day or two. That's when we all noticed that the day seemed to be slipping away faster than normal. When we started, my watch read 8:30 a.m. Now it was around 11 a.m., but the sun was slanting low as if it were late afternoon. It had that orange glow you see around 5 p.m. We questioned one another's timekeeping. Ty insisted his watch read 11, but also said, "The sun's got to be a glitch or something, right?" A glitch in the sun? The more we tried to rationalize it, the more unsettled we became. Rusty growled at the air again, hackles raised. Then he bolted off into the woods. "Rusty," I shouted, chasing after him. Ty and Sierra followed. We called and whistled, ironically like we'd become the ones whistling now. After maybe 10 minutes of frantic searching, we found Rusty at the base of an old oak, whimpering. Blood trickled from a scratch on his left ear. I looked around for thorns or an animal. Nothing. No footprints but ours. No branches in reach that could have scratched him. The moment I put a hand on him, he turned to me with a blank stare. His eyes weren't clouded then, but they felt off. No wag, no greeting, just a stare. He was fine, physically. We put him back on a leash to keep him close. By that point, Sierra was trembling, whispering to Ty, "We should go back. I don't like this." Ty's frustration was obvious, but he admitted he didn't like it either. We all agreed to head back to the truck, even if it cut our trip short. Whatever was happening, molded food, weird day-night cycles, vanished phone power, was beyond our comfort level. We turned around and started to retrace our steps. That's when we realized we were moving in circles. We recognized the same twisted pine 3 times. We tried using Ty's compass, but the needle spun slowly on its own, refusing to lock north. We pressed on in the direction we believed we'd come from, only to circle back to the same gorge. Each time, we'd hear those faint whistles on the breeze, or we'd glimpse something flitting between trees. Twice, I spotted a shape that looked like a person, but maybe that was my stressed brain. Time grew more warped. My watch now read 2 p.m., yet the sky was almost black with dusk. Sierra turned pale, complaining her stomach hurt. I noticed her left hand trembling. She asked me, "What's my mother's name again?" I blinked in confusion. "Alice, right?" She looked at me with watery eyes and said, "That's not her name. I don't remember her name." Then she started crying, hugging herself. We stumbled upon a small clearing, decided to set camp. We built another fire ring and tried to spark a flame. This time it caught quickly, but flared green and hissed in an unsettling way. Once it finally settled, we all huddled close, uneasy. Ty rummaged for his flask of whiskey, took a few swigs. Sierra barely spoke. Around that time, I noticed Rusty wouldn't eat. He sat upright, rigid, eyes fixed on the darkness beyond the firelight. If I touched him, he wouldn't react. No tail wag, no shift. Just stiff. I tried to feed him a piece of Ty's leftover jerky, but he turned away. He was healthy just hours ago, so I had no explanation. Darkness fell rapidly. We still had a bit of water, so we made some quick coffee from Ty's stash, swallowing lumps of near-rancid powder. We were too on edge to truly rest. Ty set up his tent facing the fire, put Sierra inside it, and told me, "Make sure you tie Rusty's leash to something." So I did. Then I crawled into my own tent and tried to calm down. The wind outside soared into a high-pitched wail that nearly drowned out my own breathing. I dozed off for maybe an hour, I'm not sure. When I awoke, everything was silent except for the faint whisper of leaves. Then came the voices again just outside. I heard Ty's voice say, "Mark, help me." It was strangled, desperate, like he was in pain. My heart hammered. I fumbled for my flashlight. The zipper on my tent jammed. I yanked at it, cursing under my breath until it came free. I burst out, shining the flashlight around. I saw Ty's silhouette near a tree, but it vanished the second I got closer, leaving me alone in the clearing with only the half-dead fire. From behind, Sierra's voice whispered, "Did you see him?" "He's out there." I spun around, and there she was, standing barefoot, eyes wide, blinking only once in a long while. She was smiling, but it didn't touch her eyes at all. "Sierra, are you okay?" I asked. She gave me that fixed grin, then turned and walked back toward the tent, each step slow and deliberate. I followed, shining my light on her. She crawled inside Ty's tent. Ty, apparently asleep, didn't even stir. I saw the lumps of their sleeping bags. Something was off about the shape of Sierra's body, though, almost as if her limbs were too long or arranged incorrectly. But in the dark, it could have been a trick of the shadows. Confused and unsettled, I checked on Rusty. He was still tied to a tree, staring at me through the dim light, not blinking. I crept back to my tent, terrified but unsure what to do. I eventually dozed off with the flashlight gripped in my hand. At dawn, I woke to the sound of a scream. I scrambled outside to find Sierra cowering by the smoldering embers of the fire pit, pressing her hands to her ears. Ty was kneeling beside her, trying to console her. She babbled about hearing chanting in her head. Then she looked up at me and said, "I saw your face rotting in the dirt." Ty looked at me with alarm. She turned to him and asked, "Who are you again?" My blood ran cold. I felt protective of her, but also deeply afraid. Rusty was lying on his side, breathing shallowly. I tried to get him to stand. He did eventually, but moved stiffly, almost robotic. Ty decided we needed to get out. Enough was enough. Sierra was losing it, Rusty was unresponsive, and we were all on edge. We packed up quickly, ignoring how half our gear had vanished overnight. My brand new sleeping bag? Gone. Ty's rope? Gone. We found scraps of rope frayed around tree roots like it had dissolved. The place smelled faintly sweet, like decaying fruit. No explanation. We just forced ourselves to start walking. Ty had his revolver in a side holster. He'd insisted on bringing it for bear protection. Now, I found it comforting to see the weapon there. We marched in what we believed was the direction of the truck. The day felt unnaturally dim, like a heavy storm was about to break. Yet the sky was dull gray, no storm clouds. Hours passed. The terrain seemed to repeat. Similar trees, similar slopes. The labyrinth of woods felt endless. Sierra stumbled and fell more than once, her expression vacant. She said she was hungry, but everything we had was rotted or reeking of mold, except Ty's last bit of jerky. She refused it, gagging when she caught a whiff of it. We came upon a ridge that overlooked the same hollow from the day before, or so we thought. At the base of a tall oak, we spotted something that made my skin crawl. My own backpack. But it looked old, weather-worn, partially shredded, like it had been abandoned for years. I approached it, half in shock, and poked it with a stick. Inside was a page from my journal, but it was torn and stained. The handwriting looked like mine, but the date read October 30th, which should have been 2 days from now. My spine prickled. Ty cursed under his breath. Sierra just stared with that half-smile, like none of it mattered. We heard the whistling again. This time, it was faint, far down the slope, carrying up on the breeze. It repeated the same pattern, too quick to be a bird, too melodic to be natural. Rusty jerked at his leash, snapping it free from my hand, and sprinted down the slope. We chased after him, hearts pounding, calling his name. The ground was slick with leaves, making us slip. Halfway down, I lost sight of Ty and Sierra behind me. I stumbled to the bottom, panting, seeing Rusty sniff around a spot near a cluster of boulders. The whistling stopped. Everything went quiet. I looked around for Ty, for Sierra. Nothing. The silence pressed on my ears like I was underwater. I heard a faint trickle of water, maybe a stream, then footsteps. I whirled around. Sierra emerged from behind a tree, moving in that uncanny, jerky way. She lifted her hand to wave at me. "Hi, Mark," she said, smiling too wide. I got lost. She was alone. "Where's Ty?" I asked. She didn't blink. "Who?" she said, cocking her head. "Oh, Ty, right." Then she giggled in this broken, forced way. "He said I had to gather wood." Something moved behind her, and Ty stepped into view. His eyes were half-lidded, like he'd been drugged. A patch of red stained his shirt near the collar. "Ty, what happened?" I whispered, approach cautious. He mouthed something soundless, but Sierra reached over and stroked his cheek. "He's fine," she said, voice trembling with an odd mixture of tenderness and menace. "He's just scared." Ty's gaze locked on mine, pleading. When Sierra let him step forward, I could see a shallow slash across his neck. Blood had dried around it. He opened his mouth to speak, but no words came out. In that moment, I realized we were in deeper trouble than I could have ever imagined. Sierra's whole demeanor screamed that she wasn't herself. As I reached for Ty's shoulder to steady him, Sierra lunged for Ty's holster. Her movement was clumsy but fast enough. She yanked the revolver free and aimed it at me. Her hands shook. Her eyes flickered with fear and something else, like she was battling something inside. I raised my hands, heart pounding so hard I could feel it in my teeth. "Sierra, put it down," I said calmly. She giggled again, lips parted in a grin that made me nauseous. "He's inside me," she whispered. "I'm sorry." She pivoted, pointed the gun at Ty, and fired. The shot rang out, echoing through the hollow like thunder. Ty collapsed to his knees, eyes wide, a crimson flower blooming on his chest. My breath caught in my throat. Sierra stared at him, then stared at the gun, as though she couldn't believe what she'd done. Tears sprang to her eyes. "No," she rasped, voice quivering. "I didn't want to." Ty coughed, blood on his lips, reaching a shaky hand out to her. She shrank away. I made a move to tackle her, but she spun back to me. The gun clicked, empty. Ty must have kept only one bullet chambered or fired off the others in the past. Panicking, Sierra flung the revolver aside and snatched Ty's hunting knife from his belt. She crouched over Ty, pressing the blade to his throat. He was too weak to resist, breathing in ragged gasps. I charged her. She slashed wildly, catching me across the forearm, searing pain lacing through me. I wrestled the knife away, knocking it onto the dirt. She stared at me with raw hatred in her eyes, though I suspected it wasn't truly her. "Why are you doing this?" I asked. She just whimpered. Then her features seemed to flicker for a second, like a glitch in a movie. With a guttural cry, she grabbed Ty's head, turning it at an awful angle, and I heard an unmistakable crack. He sagged, lifeless. My mind reeled. In a matter of seconds, Ty was gone. I was sobbing, unable to think, as Sierra stepped back, dropping Ty's body with a dull thud. She looked horrified, like a captive in her own skin. I'm not me, she chanted. Then her eyes rolled back, and she started convulsing as blood trickled from her nose. She collapsed to her knees, giving a strangled groan, and turned the knife on herself, slashing her own forearm. I rushed forward, trying to stop her. She kicked at me, babbling, He's, and I couldn't catch the rest of it. She managed to slice deeply into her side before she went limp, gasping on the ground. Rusty just stood there, quietly watching, tail stiff. What followed felt like a fever dream. I knelt beside Ty's body, pressing my hand to the gaping wound in his chest, desperate to see if he was still alive. He wasn't. Sierra lay there, eyes open, breath rattling. I wanted to help her, but also feared she'd snap again. The sun was almost gone, leaving the hollow dark and cold. Over the next 20 minutes, Sierra's breathing slowed to a shallow rasp. She looked up at me, tears mingling with sweat, and whispered, I'm sorry, one last time. Then the light left her eyes. I sat in that place, cradling my bleeding arm, dog at my side, two corpses before me. Rusty's warm presence was the only thing that kept me from screaming myself hoarse. At some point, I realized I had to survive, had to get back to civilization, had to report this tragedy, but how? Nothing made sense. Time was messed up, the forest seemed alive, and something had clearly possessed Sierra to kill Ty. Finally, I stood, took Ty's revolver, empty, but maybe I could reload if I found spare ammo in his pack, and rummaged for anything else salvageable. His backpack was still on his shoulders. I found a small box of ammo in a side pocket. 6 bullets remained, all of them real. My hands shook as I loaded each chamber. A single bullet had ended Ty's life. Now I had a full cylinder. I glanced down at Ty, tears sliding down my cheeks. I'm sorry, cousin, I whispered. Then I grabbed a canteen from the outer pocket, thankful to discover it was still half full of clean water. I forced myself to take a drink, ignoring the coppery smell of blood in the air. Rusty followed as I staggered away. I didn't know what direction I was heading, only that I had to keep moving. The forest closed in around me like a living thing. The whistles resumed, sounding mocking. I heard them behind me, then ahead. Once, I heard Sierra's voice call, "Mark?" I refused to look. If I looked, I'd lose what remained of my mind. By sheer chance, I spotted an old, overgrown path that reminded me of something Ty had once described. A route leading toward a ranger station dating back to the 1930s. We'd planned to pass it on our way out if we had time. Through the gloom, I followed the faint signs. A battered wooden post, a patch of cleared grass. My watch told me it was 2 p.m., but the sky was ink black with scattered stars. A warm wind ruffled my hair, carrying faint moans that might have been the breeze or the echoes of something else. I caught myself losing time, too. I'd walk a stretch of path, then blink and realize I'd gone 100 yards without remembering. Sometimes, Rusty lagged behind or trotted ahead. At one point, I looked down to see the revolver in my hand, safety off, and no recollection of drawing it. The forest occasionally flashed with pale green light, like swamp gas igniting. My sense of direction crumbled. My sense of self threatened to follow. Hours later, or maybe days, I couldn't tell, I stumbled onto a small structure partially hidden in the trees. A sign read, "Ranger Station, authorized personnel only." The roof sagged in places, windows cracked, but it was shelter. I forced open the door, stepping inside with Rusty. The place smelled of mildew and old paper. A dusty desk, a battered chair, some filing cabinets. My flashlight illuminated a mounted radio. At that sight, I felt a flicker of hope. If it worked, I could call for help. I set the revolver on the desk and fiddled with the knobs, flipping switches. A hum crackled through the speaker. I pressed the transmit button. "Hello? Anyone reading me? This is Mark Tiller. There's been an accident. 2 casualties. Please send help." Static hissed. I tried again and again, voice cracking with desperation. Finally, amid the static, I heard a faint response. "Coordinates?" I babbled something about the outskirts of Pickett CC Park, near the Kentucky border, gave my rough bearings. The voice said, "Stay put, we're sending..." Then the radio cut out. I waited, heartsick, exhaustion threatening to collapse my brain. Rusty huddled by my feet, shivering in short spasms. I reached to pet him, but he barely reacted. I realized my left arm was throbbing from the gash Sierra had made. It looked swollen, hot to the touch, possibly infected. I rummaged through old drawers, found a moldy first aid kit with bandages and tried to clean it with the remaining water. The pain was excruciating, but the adrenaline kept me functional. Suddenly, a scraping sound outside made me freeze. Then, the door creaked open behind me. Revolver in hand, I spun around to see a silhouette. My flashlight flickered over the figure, Ty, or something wearing Ty's face. He was soaked in blood, the bullet hole in his chest wide and black, but he was standing. He opened his mouth as if to speak, but only a dry whistle came out. My stomach lurched. This was impossible, yet there he was. He lurched toward me, arms outstretched, that same vacant grin Sierra had worn. Rusty barked once, a strained yelp. I pointed the revolver. My mind screamed that Ty was dead, that I'd seen him die, that his neck was broken. This had to be something else, some twisted forest entity. "Stay back," I shouted, tears in my eyes. He lurched again, mouth twisting into a half snarl, half grin. I fired one shot, center mass. The echo rang in the tiny station, making my ears ring. The figure toppled backward, but as soon as he hit the ground, he vanished like a wisp of shadow. No body remained. Just the stench of decay. My hands trembled so badly, I almost dropped the gun. Then the radio crackled to life again. A man's voice. "Ranger Carlson, we're en route. Hold your location." I stared at the radio in disbelief. The voice repeated it, then went silent. I huddled down in the corner, gun still raised, hugging Rusty with my free arm. I forced my eyes to stay open. The taste of iron filled my mouth from how hard I'd bitten my lip in terror. Outside, the forest moaned and whistled. Eventually, exhaustion overcame me, and I slipped into a half-sleep. Nightmares swirling. I dreamed of Ty and Sierra devouring each other under green flames, of the forest reversing time so that we never left the clearing. I dreamt Rusty's eyes turned white as he whispered my name. I woke with a jerk, uncertain how long I'd dozed. The first gray light of dawn seeped through the cracked windows. The radio was silent, but the door was open. Footprints in the dirt outside that looked half human, half something else. I limped out, revolver in hand, Rusty trailing behind. My watch said 10 a.m., but the sky was pastel pink, more like sunrise. I found a dirt path behind the station that led up a slope. After about half a mile, I caught sight of a service road. Relief almost buckled my knees. I followed it, gun ready in case something else tried to appear. When I finally saw a battered green pickup with a Park Service logo, tears of relief stung my eyes. A park ranger hopped out, scanning me with wide-eyed concern. "Are you Mark Tiller?" he asked. I remember telling him what happened, stumbling over my words about how Ty and Sierra were dead. The ranger seemed perplexed, though not entirely disbelieving. He offered me water, which I drank in a frenzy. He helped me and Rusty into the truck. My mind flickered on the possibility that he might not be real, but I was too exhausted to care. As he drove me out, he kept asking details. I explained about the gunshot, the rotted supplies, the time anomalies. I showed him my watch, still reading 10 a.m., even though now the sky looked like midday. He just nodded grimly. We arrived at a small ranger station checkpoint near the park boundary. Another ranger joined us, along with the county sheriff's deputy. The deputy listened to my story with raised eyebrows. I could tell they thought I might be delirious or in shock. I gave them approximate coordinates for Ty and Sierra's bodies. They radioed a search team. At that point, paramedics arrived, tended to my infected wound and general dehydration. I kept asking about Rusty, worried he might be sick or possessed or something, but the paramedics said he just seemed exhausted, maybe traumatized. No one found anything unnatural about his condition, though he remained eerily quiet. They let me ride to the hospital. On the way, I heard the radio chatter about a missing persons call that matched Sierra's last name. The county had no record of a Tyler Bain entering the park in the last week, another detail that made my head spin. I tried to clarify, but the sheriff told me to rest. At the hospital, they kept me for a few days, treating my arm. I gave a statement that officials politely wrote down, though I doubt they believed half of it. They said the search team found partial remains near a deep hollow. They didn't identify them yet. No mention of the second body. No mention of illusions or rotted gear. I tried to contact the sheriff after I was discharged, but my calls went nowhere. No one ever gave me a conclusive answer. Back at my apartment in Nashville, I had nightmares for weeks. Rusty hovered near me, eyes returning to normal, but still uneasy whenever we went on walks at night. I couldn't shake the feeling that something followed me out of the woods. Sometimes, late at night, I'd hear that faint whistle outside my window, though we lived downtown. I'd rush to the window, see nothing. The smell of decaying fruit sometimes wafted through my living room with no source. About 2 months after the ordeal, I drove out to the park's entrance to get closure, to see if they'd updated anything about Ty and Sierra. The ranger I spoke to acted like he barely remembered me. He said the area I described was off-limits, now due to a pending investigation. When I pressed for details, he shrugged. "I'm not even sure we found the place you're talking about, bud." Then he gave me a measured look, like maybe I was the one who'd hallucinated everything, but I know the truth. I bear the scar on my arm from Sierra's knife, the memories of that whistling, and the sense that time fractured under that forest canopy. Some nights, I dream that I'm still there, stuck in a loop. Ty is alive again, and we're sitting around the campfire. Sierra is humming a lullaby. Rusty is wagging his tail, unafraid. Then I blink, and everything turns to rot. Flesh peeling off bones, the fire burning green. The dog's eyes white. I jolt awake in a cold sweat, my heart pounding 1,000 beats a minute. I can't say for certain what force we encountered in Whistle Hollow. Maybe it was a shapeshifter or some malevolent entity older than the park itself. Maybe it was just the raw madness of isolation. But something changed Sierra, took her over, forced her to kill Ty and attempt to kill me. Something twisted the landscape, rotted our supplies, messed with our sense of time. It felt personal, targeting our vulnerabilities and relationships. The forest seemed to watch us, feeding on our fear. To this day, I'm uncertain if the rescue I experienced was real or just another layer to that nightmare. I wake up sometimes and check the date, worried I might discover it's still October, that I never truly escaped. Rusty, though, is the one reminder that I'm in the real world. He clings to me now, refusing to let me out of his sight for too long. At night, if the wind whistles just right, he'll raise his head and stare at the door, letting out the softest whimper, almost as though he recognizes a call from somewhere far away. And that's my story. Call me paranoid, call me traumatized, but I swear there's a piece of me still wandering that forest, searching for a time that makes sense. I only hope that if you ever decide to hike off the grid, you'll pay attention to the oddities. Those little signals that say, "Go back," because if you stay too long in Whistle Hollow, you might find yourself lost in endless nights, repeating your own screams in the wind, or facing something that wears your friend's face while it draws you in, bullet by bullet, breath by breath, until you have no sense of what's real or who you really are. If you value your sanity, stay clear of that place. Not everyone comes back. And those who do, well, you've heard my story. If there's a moral, it's that some doors aren't meant to be opened, especially not the ones in your own mind that nature can twist and break. Whether or not you believe me, take my warning. Nothing about Whistle Hollow is normal. People go missing there. Time goes missing there. The forest is alive with something that wants to see you unravel. If you're smart, you'll never test it. Because sometimes, when you stare into the blackness of the pines, something stares back, and it might just decide that it likes the shape of your fear enough to keep you forever. My name is Caleb Winters. I'm 28 years old, and this happened in April of 2025. I can't say I truly understand everything I went through, and I don't expect anyone else to believe me. There are moments I've replayed over and over, asking myself if I caused the horror on my own or if something ancient and vengeful still lurks in those Tennessee woods. But I have to get this story out, partly because I can't live with it anymore, and partly because I want to warn you. If you're ever in Pickett State Forest, stay far away from that hollow with the black oak tree. Nothing there is what it seems. I'd decided to go camping to get away from everything. The city noise, my self-sabotaging mindset, and the creeping anxiety that had recently cost me a well-paying contract as a freelance video editor. I was strung out, lonely, and suffocating in my studio apartment. My counselor suggested nature might do me some good, so I packed my modest gear, grabbed my German Shepherd mix, Bear, and headed to the remote corners of Tennessee, thinking I'd find some peace and silence. I'm originally from up north, with zero military experience and only a basic knowledge of the wilderness from weekend Boy Scout trips many years ago. Still, the idea of an untouched forest, the hush of the wind through tall pines and the crunch of leaves under my boots, seemed like the perfect antidote to my racing thoughts. Bear was practically vibrating with excitement the entire 3-hour drive. He was a large, energetic mutt, mostly German Shepherd, with maybe a splash of husky, judging by his thick fur. The first night, I set up my small 2-person tent near a stone arch formation I'd read about online. The route was partially on the official trails of Pickett State Park, but I took a detour based on an old blog post mentioning scenic, lesser-known paths. It was quiet, almost too quiet. When you get used to cars and sirens, the silence of a forest at night can be unnerving, a living vacuum of sound. But it was also oddly comforting. I let Bear wander around, sniffing every root and fallen branch. The sky was bright with stars. That night, though, small things started to feel off. My phone, which had been at 80%, dropped to 30% in under an hour, even though I was barely using it. The GPS app stopped responding. Then Bear, a dog who rarely barked, started barking into the darkness for no apparent reason. I called him back, but he just stood there, ears perked and hackles up. When I went to investigate, all I found was nothing. The empty black. I shrugged it off, maybe a raccoon or a passing deer. Yet Bear refused to settle for a long time, and I eventually had to coax him back with treats before he'd curl up near my sleeping bag. I brushed it aside. The night was quiet, and the next morning dawned crisp. I made a small fire to warm up and brew coffee. My plan was to keep trekking deeper into the park. While official trails were well documented, I'd also downloaded offline maps for unmarked paths. I felt a tingle of excitement at the idea of exploring the unknown, maybe stumbling across a hidden waterfall or an overlook not many had photographed. It felt like an adventure. If only I'd known what lay ahead. Around midday, I met a man while I was refilling my water from a clear, trickling stream. He introduced himself as Tyler Knox, 33, from Nashville. He had bright eyes, a welcoming grin, and an easy charm about him. He seemed like the kind of person who might have been an actor or a teacher. As we chatted, he mentioned he used to be a youth pastor. Now, he traveled around writing about local folklore. He was out here to research some Appalachian legend about haunted trees and ghostly voices. I half laughed, but he insisted many people claimed to see apparitions at night, hearing screams or moans emanating from certain old oaks. This part of Tennessee, he said, had an undercurrent of unusual stories. Some people believed in them wholeheartedly. Others brushed them off as illusions. Still, I liked Tyler. We hiked together for the next hour, sharing lunches and stories. He took us through a winding ridge which, according to my phone's offline map, should have looped back near a known campsite. But the terrain wasn't matching the digital lines. My phone insisted we were near a trail, but on the ground, there was only thick undergrowth and strange stone outcroppings. Tyler said something about older maps not being updated, or maybe the terrain changed after a recent storm. We laughed it off. Honestly, it was kind of fun, feeling like an explorer. Bear seemed relaxed around Tyler, trotting between us with curious sniffs. Late afternoon was warm and breezy. We found a spot with relatively flat ground and decided to camp there together for the night. The idea of company eased my nerves. We gathered firewood, and Tyler told me stories about local legends: ghost women in white, witches burned at the stake, hidden caverns where you could hear crying children. I listened wide-eyed, half tempted to believe. We had a decent fire going by the time twilight arrived, painting the sky in fiery oranges and purples. Out of nowhere, something weird happened with the fire. It sizzled and turned briefly green, almost like someone had thrown copper sulfate on the flames. Then it flickered back to orange. Tyler noticed, but shrugged it off. "Might be some mineral from the wood," he said. I didn't argue. I assumed there was a logical reason. But in my gut, I felt something creep up my spine. Like the forest was reminding me that logic only went so far out here. That night, I woke to Bear whining. I looked out the tent mesh and saw him sitting rigid, staring into the darkness. The hair along his back was raised. I crawled out, calling his name softly, and then I heard it. Footsteps. Or maybe it was an animal rustling the brush. In any case, it felt like someone was there. I circled around, my flashlight scanning. Nothing, but I had the eerie sense of being watched. The forest canopy overhead was so thick that it swallowed the moonlight. My flashlight beam caught flickers of silver along the leaves, spiderwebs glistening. I told myself to calm down, that the forest at night is simply full of illusions. In the morning, I found Bear asleep by the burned-out fire pit, curled up tight. Tyler emerged from his tent soon after. We chatted about maybe moving on, looking for a known trail. But just as we started to pack, we noticed something bizarre. We'd stowed our gear in separate spots the evening before, yet all the supplies were dumped together in a messy pile, as if someone had rummaged through them. My backpack was lying open, stuff scattered. Some of my food had rotted to the point of being black and fuzzy, even though it had been sealed and brand new. Tyler's face turned pale as he rummaged through his own gear, cursing under his breath. His freeze-dried meals, which should have been fine for months, smelled rancid like sulfur. Bear sniffed and growled at the pile. I tried to rationalize. Maybe an animal snuck into our camp and messed with the food, but why was it so rotten already? These were shelf-stable packs. The little rational voice in my head was losing ground to a rising panic. Tyler said, "I've heard stories like this, about cursed places." I responded, "Don't start," but my stomach churned with fear. We pressed on. We had just enough supplies left to keep going, but we'd need to reach a main trail soon or risk being without food for the weekend. The map on my phone was glitchy. The battery was draining at an impossible rate. Tyler's phone wouldn't turn on at all, although he swore he had charged it overnight with a power bank. Strange malfunctions, we told each other. Just random hardware fails. We tried to joke about haunted forests. Around midday, while forging a path through dense laurels, we heard a voice call out. It sounded like a young woman. We forced our way through a thicket and found her. She was barefoot, around 19 or 20, wearing jeans torn at the knee. She was scratched up, arms trembling. Her hair was ragged, her eyes wide with terror. She saw us and shrank back as though we might hurt her. We introduced ourselves, tried to calm her. She only said her name once, June. She kept glancing over her shoulder and muttering something about the tree that chases. I asked if she'd been separated from a group, if she was lost. She clutched my arm with surprising force, whispered, "Don't let it find me." Tyler tried to ask what it was, but June just shook her head, tears in her eyes. She muttered about hearing screams at night and seeing dead faces in the bark. Bear gently licked her hand, as if sensing her distress. We decided to set up a quick break to let June rest. We boiled some water so she could have a warm drink. Her feet were torn up from brambles and rocks. While I fumbled in my first aid kit, June started shaking violently. She said, "It's hungry for voices, don't speak too loudly." That was all we got out of her. Then she abruptly dropped the tin cup of water and bolted. She ran into the woods so fast we couldn't catch up. We found no trail of footprints, no sign of her. Tyler and I stood there panting, stunned, unsure what we'd just witnessed. Sometime later, we found a clearing near a large, twisted oak tree that soared high above the surrounding canopy. It had blackish bark, thick with lumps and tangles, almost as if it had grown multiple times in on itself. There was a faint stench in the air, like damp moss mixed with the decay. Something about that clearing felt wrong, like we weren't supposed to be there. My skin prickled. Bear whined again. Tyler exhaled sharply, pointing to a rotting rope that dangled from one of the thicker branches. It looked ancient, worn into the bark. "Maybe it's from an old swing," I said, but Tyler looked grim. "Or a noose," he replied. That was enough to convince us to keep moving. We set camp a few hundred yards away by a large rock outcropping. At least we had some cover. We were both exhausted, physically and mentally. Night fell rapidly. The temperature dropped. A fog crept through the trees, making the beam from my flashlight dance with swirling shapes. We built a small fire. This time it flared up fine, but for some reason it cast flickering shadows that seemed too large for the flames. Shadows stretched along the rocks in shapes that didn't match Tyler or me. Every time I tried to watch them closely, they snapped back to normal. I told myself it was my imagination. Around midnight, I awoke to find myself outside my tent, lying on the cold ground. My sleeping bag was still inside. Bear was pacing in circles, whining, licking my face when I stirred. My head pounded. I had no memory of leaving the tent. I looked around for Tyler's tent, which was pitched a short distance away. It was empty, the flap was open. Panicking a bit, I called out for him, my voice echoing strangely. No answer. I pulled on my boots, telling Bear to stay close. We fanned out with flashlights. About 100 yards from camp, I found Tyler leaning against a tree, but he was facing away from me, just looking into the darkness. I came closer, shining my light on him. He turned, and his grin was too wide. The beams caught his eyes, but they didn't reflect the typical bright pinpoint you get in photos. It was flat, murky. He said my name in a low, drawn-out tone, Caleb, like he was tasting each syllable. My heart hammered. Something was off. But he had no visible injuries and didn't appear lost or in distress. "Where were you?" I whispered. He just laughed under his breath. "I was gathering wood." His voice had a certain echo, like two overlapping layers. I chalked it up to my own fatigue. Maybe he was half asleep, confused. But the dread that had been simmering in my gut exploded into alarm. I told him we should get back to the tents. He stared at me for a moment, as if he was seeing me for the first time. Then he nodded. Slowly. When we got back, I noticed Tyler's pack was missing from near his tent. "Did you move your gear?" I asked. He shrugged, too calmly. I tried to find it, no luck. Feeling exhausted and unsettled, I told him we'd figure it out in the morning. He didn't protest. He lay down in his tent, leaving the flap partially open. I lay awake the rest of the night, occasionally seeing him in my peripheral vision, just lying there, eyes wide open, illuminated by the faint moonlight, staring, blinking too little. The next morning, I discovered all my water bottles were emptied on the ground, the contents soaking the dirt. My food supply? Gone. When I confronted Tyler, who was crouched at the dead fire pit, he acted clueless, said maybe an animal got in. But Bear sniffed around suspiciously, then growled at Tyler, hair on end. For the first time since we met, my dog refused to approach him. Something was so off. Tyler tried to coax Bear over with some weird baby talk voice, but Bear bared his teeth, which was extremely unusual. This dog was gentle with everyone. As I rummaged in my tent, a jolt of terror hit me. My phone's date read April 12th, 2032. That was obviously impossible. I stared at the glitching screen. The clock was spinning backward, forward, random. Then it shut off. No matter what I did, I couldn't power it back on. My watch had also stopped at 3:12, but I had no sense of whether that was AM or PM. The sky outside was dull gray, cloudy morning or late afternoon. I couldn't be sure. We were losing all sense of day and night. The forest felt as though it were folding in on itself. Suddenly, a scream ripped through the air. Bear's scream. I whirled around to see Tyler, his face twisted in an unholy sneer, holding Bear by the scruff. Before I could react, Tyler's arm jerked with unimaginable force. I heard a sickening snap. Bear collapsed. My ears rang. I can't describe the savage emptiness I felt, watching my dog's body slump to the ground. My best friend gone in an instant. All I remember is yelling. Or maybe I just screamed inside. I grabbed a fallen branch and lunged at Tyler, swinging it with all my might. He caught it like it was nothing. He stared at me, unblinking. Then he dropped the branch, grabbed the front of my jacket, and hissed, "You said you wanted to scream, didn't you?" The voice that came out of him wasn't just his own. It sounded like me, but warbled and mocking, as though echoing a private conversation I never remembered having. I stumbled back, tripping over Bear's body. my eyes flooded with tears and adrenaline. I scrambled away, fear igniting my limbs. My beloved dog was lying motionless on the ground, eyes still open. Tyler advanced slowly, smiling that monstrous grin. Then, out of the corner of my eye, I saw the same twisted oak from before, looming through the tree line, a shadow among shadows. My adrenaline soared. I did the only thing I could. I ran, I bolted, ignoring the searing ache in my thighs, ignoring the heartbreak crippling my chest. I heard Tyler's footsteps behind me, faster, closer. My lungs burned. I crashed through brambles, scraped my arms, nearly twisted an ankle on a root, and still forced myself forward. At some point, I turned to see if he was behind me. No sign of him, just the quiet forest and a rising mist. I kept going until my legs were jelly. I eventually slumped against a thick trunk, panting, tears still on my cheeks. My entire body trembled. Part of me wanted to go back for Bear's remains, but I couldn't face that demon wearing Tyler's face. I had to survive. But survive how? I had minimal supplies and no sense of direction. The sky was that same washed-out gray, the sun hidden. I found a small stream, maybe the same one I'd used the day before. I tried splashing water on my face, tried to calm down, but my heart hammered uncontrollably. As I pushed deeper into unfamiliar territory, I came upon the black oak, the same tree from the clearing, or at least it looked exactly like it, with that noose-like rope embedded in the bark. But it felt like I'd traveled miles from the campsite. Could it be the same one? The bark had that same charred, twisted pattern. The rope swayed gently in a breeze I didn't feel. The stench of decay hung in the air. The clearing itself was quiet, too quiet. No birds, no insects. Just an intense hush, like the forest holding its breath. I approached it cautiously, half in a trance. Something about the tree drew me in. I recalled the stories Tyler had told me about the screaming tree, a legend about a banshee that collects voices of the damned. Could that be real? That was when I noticed carved faces in the trunk. Some were so worn they looked like lumps, but others had features, eyes, a mouth open in a permanent shriek. One face was small and feminine, reminding me of June. Another face. God help me, it looked like Bear's muzzle, twisted in agony. My knees nearly buckled. And then a new face formed before my eyes, my own. The bark rippled like water, and I could see a rough impression of my own mouth parted, as if caught mid-scream. I heard a whisper on the wind, words I couldn't make out, but they seemed to carry sorrow, anger, desperation. My vision blurred and my ears rang again. The entire clearing felt like it existed outside normal time. A voice behind me said, "It's your turn to scream." I whipped around to see Tyler, or the thing wearing his body. Up close, I could see his pupils had enlarged, swallowing the iris. His shirt was torn, revealing too pale skin. He was smiling that same unnatural grin. "Did you hear me?" he asked in a sing-song voice. "It's your turn." I was fueled by the despair of losing Bear, by the fear that I was next. Looking at Tyler's contorted face, I felt the same jolt of hatred and terror. On the ground, near an old stump, lay a broken trekking pole. Mine, I realized. In a burst of desperate anger, I lunged for it, brandishing it like a spear. Tyler advanced, arms extended as if to embrace me. I thrusted the splintered end of the pole into his shoulder or chest. I couldn't see exactly. He gasped, staggering back. Instead of blood, a thin black vapor oozed out, swirling around the wound. The smell was sulfuric, burning my nostrils. He half laughed, half choked. He grabbed the pole, ripping it out, releasing more of that vile mist. "This is my body now," he spat, voice layered with many echoes. Then he lunged with impossible speed, slamming me into the trunk of the oak. The bark felt wet and warm against my back. I screamed, mostly in raw pain and panic. Tyler pressed his face inches from mine. His breath reeked of rot. "Scream for me," he hissed, an unholy hunger in his eyes. "Let her feed." Her? My mind latched onto the idea that something else was controlling him. The banshee, some demonic presence that wanted screams like sustenance. I was pinned, the world spinning. I could feel the rough bark trying to cling to my jacket. Then, out of nowhere, a memory flashed. I had a small emergency flare tucked in my belt kit. It was designed to signal rescuers. I managed to free an arm. Tyler's grip tightened, but I yanked the flare free. In one motion, I flicked the cap, sparked the tip. The bright red glow flared into the clearing. Tyler shrieked, startled by the sudden flame. He stumbled back, letting go of me. I used that moment to stagger away, adrenaline screaming in my veins. With the flare ignited, I could see the swirling haze around the oak was almost alive, flickering with shapes that looked like clawing hands or open jaws. I had no idea if this would help, but I grabbed a bottle of fire-starting gel from my belt kit, stuff I used to help wet wood catch. I splattered it across the trunk and the base of the tree, frantically flicking the flare near it. A sudden whoosh, flames erupted, casting the entire clearing in a wild, dancing light. Tyler roared, or the thing that was Tyler, as if the flames were hurting him too. The oak seemed to let out a sound, a distortion that was half scream, half hurricane wind. My ears popped. My vision blurred again. I saw the face in the bark, my own. It twisted, the mouth opening wide, then burning away. For a split second, I glimpsed other faces flickering in the flames, each contorted with sorrow or agony. The sound soared in pitch, like hundreds of overlapping screams. The trunk caught, the bark cracking. Something black bubbled out from within. I barely managed to limp away, half blinded by the intense heat and smoke. I didn't get far before I collapsed behind a cluster of rocks, coughing. My mind spun with the idea that maybe the tree would burn down and the horror would end. But time wasn't done distorting. I watched through watery eyes as the flames on the trunk seemed to rewind, then burst forward again, as if time looped around it. I saw the bark blacken, then restore, then blacken again in flickers. A wave of dizziness took me, and I lost track of how long I lay there. Eventually, I came to. My leg was throbbing, possibly broken or sprained. The clearing was dark, the smell of scorched wood thick in the air. The tree was still smoldering, though not fully consumed. Of Tyler, there was no sign. I forced myself to crawl away, deeper into the woods. Each movement sent a stab of pain through my right leg. My hands shook uncontrollably. With no phone, no sense of direction, I just moved. My only goal was to survive. My thoughts cycled between heartbreak for Bear, terror of Tyler, and revulsion at what I'd seen. Somehow, I found a dirt path. I kept crawling, occasionally leaning on nearby trunks to hop forward, tears streaming down my face. The sky overhead began to lighten. Whether that meant dawn or some illusion, I couldn't say. My watch was dead, my phone was fried. Time no longer felt real. Maybe it had been hours or days. My throat was parched. My body screamed for rest, but I feared stopping would mean death. At some point, I saw a group of silhouettes. A rescue party or illusions again? I tried to call out, but my voice was a weak rasp. I half remember strong hands lifting me, a barrage of questions, flashlights, paramedics. My vision swam in and out, then blackness. I woke in a small rural clinic, that's what I was told anyway. My head was bandaged, my leg was in a cast, I had a fractured tibia. A local search and rescue volunteer told me I'd been missing for 5 days. They asked about next of kin, about my dog, about Tyler Knox. I explained as best I could, though it was impossible to articulate. They told me no one named Tyler Knox was registered in the park's logs. A few hikers reported hearing screams in the distance on multiple nights, but no sightings matched my description. No one had found Bear's body. The rescuers found me alone on a trail near the main road. I'd apparently scrawled something in the dirt. "She hears me." I had no memory of doing that. They tested me for rabies, toxins, hallucinogens. Everything came back normal. A local deputy asked if I'd had a mental break. I told him about Bear, about the glitching phone, the rotted supplies, the monstrous Tyler. The deputy pursed his lips and said, "Sometimes black bears or cougars can spook hikers, and we get all sorts of wild stories." I realized they didn't believe me. How could they? I barely believed myself. I made it home eventually, hobbling on crutches. Late one night, unable to sleep, I powered on my phone, which the paramedics had returned. Miraculously, it worked, though the date read 1970 for a moment before recalibrating to 2025. My stomach turned to ice when I discovered my voice memo app was filled with dozens of new files, each time stamped over the days I'd been missing. Playing them, I heard my own voice rambling, sobbing, screaming, often repeating the words, "She's coming for me," or "I see them in the bark." Some files had animalistic growls, static, or weeping sounds I didn't recognize. One included a faint voice that sounded like a woman. "You'll scream so beautifully." A final file from the day the rescuers found me contained only the sound of my dog Bear whining in distress. I nearly smashed my phone in terror. Over the next few weeks, I tried to piece my life back together. My leg slowly healed, but my nights were haunted by nightmares of that black oak and Tyler's inhuman grin. Every time I drifted off, I saw Bear's body going limp in his arms. I'd wake up shaking, tears streaming. My friends, what few I had, tried to be supportive, but they couldn't grasp what I'd endured. Sometimes I'd glance at the clock and see minutes or hours missing. My phone's battery would spontaneously plunge from full to dead, or the alarms would go off at strange times, as if I'd never left that forest, not fully. I keep telling myself it's over, that I crippled the creature, or at least burned part of that cursed hollow, driving away the malevolent force. But it's hard to be sure. Late at night, a faint bark sometimes echoes through my apartment, or I'll catch the reflection of a twisted grin in a window behind me. My counselor says it's PTSD or complicated grief. Maybe so. But a small part of me wonders if Elenia, or whatever name belongs to that banshee presence, has followed me, marking me forever. I've thought about going back to Tennessee, about retrieving Bear's remains, giving him a proper burial, but the idea of stepping anywhere near that place makes my blood run cold. The authorities never found any tree matching my description. Officially, I was just a lost hiker who endured some kind of psychotic break. Survivor's guilt, they called it, referencing my dog. Maybe they're right. Maybe the entire thing was a horrifying hallucination. Still, I can't ignore the files on my phone, or the rope marks that appeared on my jacket's collar as though it had been snagged on something, or the fact that my offline maps remain corrupted, showing every part of the forest except for that hollow, replaced by black glitchy squares. Sometimes, in the dead of night, I get a random voicemail from an unknown number. It's always static at first, but if I listen long enough, I hear a faint voice. It might be Bear barking, or it might be me screaming. I'm telling this story because maybe, just maybe, it'll help someone else avoid the path I took. If you ever find yourself in Pickett State Forest and your GPS starts acting up, if your equipment rots or your phone shows impossible dates, turn back. If you see a twisted black oak with something like a rope embedded in its trunk, run. Don't wait around for the screams to become real, because once they do, you might not get away in one piece. I wish I could say I found peace or closure, but the best I can offer is that I've survived. Physically, at least. In my darker moments, I wonder if the banshee is still calling me, pulling me closer to a final confrontation. But for now, I stay in the city, trembling at the slightest flicker of a streetlight or the glitch of a phone app. I used to edit videos for a living, but these days I can barely focus long enough to cut a single clip without hearing phantom screams in the audio track. I can't say there's a neat moral to this story. I'd like to believe that in wounding that tree and setting it aflame, I disrupted something evil. Maybe I saved someone else from stumbling into its grasp, but the lines between reality and nightmare are forever blurred for me. My dog, Bear, was the only untainted soul I had out there, and he paid the ultimate price. Tyler, if he ever was Tyler, was taken by something beyond comprehension, and I'm left with scars that will never fully heal. So, if you're wise, stay away from that hollow in Pickett State Forest. Because if you listen closely at night, you might hear the wind carrying 1,000 tortured voices, each one trapped in the bark of that ancient, malevolent oak. And if you do, you'll know it's already too late. The forest has a way of twisting time and swallowing souls, one scream at a time. You might escape with your life, but a part of you, and the people or animals you love, could remain trapped among the shadows, forever feeding the tree's unholy hunger. That's all I can say. That's all I can bear to relive. May my warning serve you better than my courage served me. If you ever see a rope dangling from a blackened limb where no rope should be, run. Don't hesitate. Don't wonder if you're just imagining things. Run. Because in that final moment, when you hear your own voice shrieking back at you from the darkness, you'll understand what real terror is, and you'll realize you've already been claimed. I can't take back what happened. I can't bring Bear back, but at least I can share this story. If it helps even one person avoid the same fate, then maybe there's meaning behind this horror. Maybe that's the only closure I'll ever get. And if you find a phone out there, hidden among the rocks, filled with screams and static, do yourself a favor. Don't press play. My name is Ethan Wells. This happened in late October of 2025 at Frozen Head State Park in Wartburg, Tennessee. I was 32 years old, recently divorced, and still recovering from my younger brother's death the previous year. I wanted to get away from everything. My demanding clients, the memories that haunted me in my empty apartment, and the pitying looks from friends and family who worried I'd lost my spark. I longed for quiet, somewhere I could let the numbness drain away. I chose Frozen Head because it felt like a no-distraction zone. No crowds, no phone service, just miles of rugged mountain trails and thick forests. I always told myself I wasn't the outdoorsy type, but I had my dog, Juno, with me, my loyal German shepherd who'd seen me cry more times than I cared to admit. If anyone or anything could protect me from my own thoughts, it was her. I arrived on a cool, cloudy afternoon. Fallen leaves covered the narrow road leading in, and the foliage had shifted into fiery oranges and yellows. The gloom of the thick canopy turned the day into a permanent twilight. My phone showed a weak signal, barely a bar, then promptly died. I'd charged it to 90% an hour ago. I shrugged. Part of me found it annoying, but a bigger part felt relieved. I wanted to be disconnected. I parked in the designated lot, slung my backpack over my shoulder, and clipped Juno's leash. She trotted beside me, ears perked. As we followed the trail deeper in, I noticed how quiet it was. No voices, no passing hikers. Even the birds seemed subdued, offering the occasional caw or chirp, but never enough to break the unsettling hush. My plan was to hike in about 4 miles, camp near a water source, and spend a few days reading, writing in my journal, and ignoring the rest of the world. I had no illusions of being some expert survivalist. I just wanted space, and Frozen Head promised plenty of that. After a couple hours, I found a decent area by a small stream, slightly off the main trail. It was fairly level ground with an opening big enough for my one-person tent and a spot to start a fire. I fed Juno, set up camp, and rummaged for kindling. To my surprise, I actually found decent, dry tinder, and within minutes, I had a small flame crackling. Night arrived earlier than I expected. The horizon turned black, as if someone had thrown a heavy curtain over the woods. I layered up against the chill, fed Juno once more, and then tried to settle by the fire with a paperback. My eyes, though, kept drifting toward the shifting shadows beyond the glow. Each time a breeze lifted the branches overhead, I had the sensation something was out there, watching. I can't say exactly when I dozed off. I remember warm embers and the smell of pine. At some point, Juno pressed her cold nose to my cheek. That woke me with a jolt. The fire was out, leaving only a few glowing coals, but I hadn't let it burn that low. It felt like just moments ago it had been fine. My watch read a little after midnight. Hours had vanished in what felt like seconds. I should have been inside the tent. I muttered a confused apology to my dog, rummaged for a lighter, and tried to get the fire going again. The strangest thing, the tinder refused to catch. Sparks would land on the shredded bark, glow red for a breath, then die. Even the lighter's flame seemed to waver and gutter in a way I'd never seen before. Eventually, I had to give up. I retreated into the tent, my mind buzzing with the distinct sense that time was slipping away from me too easily. Juno crawled in and licked my hand, as if assuring me it was fine. I fell asleep eventually. Somewhere in the early hours of morning, though, I dreamt of my brother, Noah. He was kneeling in a ring of stones, flames dancing around him. He called my name, said something like, "Why did you let me burn?" I woke with a start, panting. My watch said 2:14 a.m., but the sky outside looked more like pre-dawn gray. I unzipped the tent. It was still pitch black. My watch had jumped forward nearly 4 hours in less than 20 minutes. I rationalized that it must have malfunctioned, or maybe I'd pressed something in my sleep. Then I tried to drift off again. By morning, I felt disoriented, but I forced a sense of normalcy. I fed Juno, made myself a quick breakfast of oatmeal, and set out to explore the surrounding area. I wanted to see if there was a better vantage point or if I might run into other hikers. That's how I met Sophie. She was kneeling by a shallow creek bed, plucking at a small ukulele-like instrument. I stared for a moment, not sure if I should disturb her. Juno took the lead, trotting right up to her. Sophie turned, startled, but then smiled widely. "Oh," she said, letting out a little laugh. "I wasn't expecting anyone else around here. Your dog is gorgeous." I introduced myself, told her Juno's name, and soon we were chatting. Sophie had a quick wit about her, an energy that felt both anxious and calm at the same time. She told me she was a musician from Kentucky, traveling on a musical solitude hike, hoping to find inspiration for a new album. She asked if I'd mind her setting up camp near me for a couple nights, just for a bit of safety in numbers. At first, I hesitated. I'd come to be alone, but another side of me, the side that was tired of my own swirling thoughts, didn't mind the company. So I agreed. Sophie and I hiked back to my campsite. She had a small day pack with her, and she said the rest of her gear was about a mile up the trail. She wanted to relocate. I helped carry some of her heavier items. The next couple of hours, we chatted about life, heartbreak, and the comfort of isolation. She was also recently out of a relationship. It was surprisingly easy to talk to her, maybe because we were both drifting souls. I let Juno run around off-leash, and she happily sniffed everything in sight. Around midday, I tried to check my phone out of habit, only to remember it had died last night for no apparent reason. I explained this to Sophie. She shrugged and said, "Same here. My phone's still at 20% and it's draining weirdly fast." We joked maybe we'd found a black hole in the heart of Frozen Head. Neither of us truly laughed, though. The more I thought about it, the more unsettling it felt. When evening came, we decided to share a meal. She had some freeze-dried veggies, and I had leftover jerky and instant rice. Combined, it was enough for two. We built a fire again. This time, it took some effort, but we managed to coax a good blaze. The heat felt comforting on my face. Juno curled up near me, half asleep. Sophie strummed her miniature guitar, weaving an eerie lullaby. Just as the sun sank below the horizon, I heard a noise in the distance. Something like a low moan, or wind passing through a hollow log. Juno lifted her head, ears straight up. Sophie paused mid-chord. "You hear that?" I asked. "Yeah? Some kind of animal?" I nodded, though I wasn't fully convinced. The sound came again, but fainter this time, as if receding deeper into the woods. Eventually, it disappeared. We shrugged it off, but I swear I saw goosebumps on Sophie's arms. Night overcame us faster than I'd expected. The flames danced, and I tried to lighten the mood by telling a silly story from my college days. But Sophie kept looking beyond the ring of light, as if expecting something to step out of the darkness. Juno was restless too, occasionally letting out a soft, uncertain whine. When we finally turned in, I made sure to keep my hatchet inside the tent's corner pocket, just in case. I doubted I'd need it, but a creeping sense of caution told me otherwise. The next morning, we discovered a bizarre sight. Our sleeping bags were unzipped from the inside, wide open, and laid out neatly on the ground a few feet away from our tents. Neither of us had done that. We'd woken up shivering slightly, the tent doors still zipped, so it wasn't an animal rummaging around. Sophie looked pale. "You sure you didn't sleepwalk?" she asked me. I told her no. Even if I had, how would I slip in and out of her tent? We talked in circles for half an hour, trying to find a rational explanation. Maybe a prank from some stealthy hiker. Maybe one of us was delirious. Ultimately, we decided to move campsites. We'd had enough weirdness at that spot. Juno was whining, scratching at the ground near the tents as if she smelled something foul. When I peered closer, I caught the whiff of rotten eggs or sulfur, but only for a second. We packed up. The moment we hoisted our backpacks, Sophie made a face. "Do you smell that?" She turned to her pack, rummaging around. When her hand came out, it was covered in black slime. The top half of her freeze-dried veggies had turned into a rancid mass of wriggling maggots. She retched, throwing the bag away. I opened my own food stash. My jerky was splotched with green mold, though I'd sealed it carefully. Everything looked as though it had been left out for a year. "How is that possible?" "It was fine last night," I said, feeling a sour swirl in my stomach. We tried to salvage a few granola bars. At least they seemed unaffected. But still, half our supplies were done for. Sophie worried about having enough food for the next couple of days, but we decided we'd move to a site closer to a known water source and see if we could fish or find help. If push came to shove, we'd have to bail early. But bailing meant backtracking 4 or 5 miles to the parking lot with minimal rations. We set off, taking what we thought was a side trail that would lead us to another campsite. The forest felt heavier, each step echoing in the quiet. No birds, No rustling in the canopy, nothing. The only sound was our breathing and Juno's panting. Every so often, we'd double-check the map. The surroundings were all off. Landmarks didn't match. The terrain seemed different from what the park guide described. Sophie joked maybe we were in some parallel dimension. Her forced laugh revealed the thin veneer of her humor. About 2 hours in, we found an abandoned campsite with an old fire ring. This clearing had battered remains of what might have been a tent, just shredded nylon. Juno nosed around and whined. Sophie said, "This is creeping me out. I have this weird sense of déjà vu, like I've seen this exact spot somewhere else, but I can't place where." I felt it too. We decided to keep going. We didn't want to linger in that place. My watch said it was around noon, but the sky overhead glowed more like dawn. The light felt wrong, dim and yellowish. Before we'd gone another 100 feet, we heard footsteps behind us. We both turned. Coming up the trail was a man, tall and lean, wearing a half-smile. He had a small backpack and an awkward wave. He looked vaguely familiar, but I couldn't place him. Sophie stiffened the moment she saw him. "Matt?" she called, voice trembling. He blinked a few times, then flashed a bigger smile. "Sophie, fancy meeting you here." His tone was too casual, too slow. "I was looking for you." I glanced sideways at Sophie. Her expression told me she wasn't happy to see him, not at all. She barely managed a greeting. Matt introduced himself to me, said he was Sophie's ex-boyfriend, though he used the phrase, "we used to be together." There was an odd emptiness in his eyes, and he kept swaying slightly. Juno growled softly at him. I'd never heard her do that with a complete stranger before. Sophie asked, How did you even know I was here?" Matt just shrugged, eyes flicking around as though searching for an answer. Then he mumbled something about social media check-in. But Sophie had said there was no way he'd know. She'd deliberately not posted about this trip. My skin prickled at the contradiction. Still, he seemed harmless enough on the surface, just out of place. He asked if he could join us, at least until we found a better campsite. Something about it felt off, but I didn't want to stir any drama. Sophie seemed uneasy, but she reluctantly said sure. We walked together in strained silence. We didn't get far before Matt claimed to be tired. We paused, and I decided to gather wood for a fire. I left Sophie with Matt but kept Juno close. She wouldn't stop looking back at him. As I walked into a small pocket of trees, I realized my phone was in my pack. I could at least check if it might show a time or any battery, but I didn't feel like pulling it out around him. He gave me a gnawing sense of dread. I told myself I was being paranoid. I returned with an armful of kindling. Matt was sitting on a log, staring at the ground, mouth parted slightly. Sophie was a few yards away, hugging herself, looking lost. Juno was by her side, pressed protectively against her legs. "Everything okay?" I asked, setting the wood down. Sophie gave a shaky nod. Matt didn't move. Then, as if a switch flipped in his brain, he lifted his head and smiled. "All good," he said, so cheerfully it startled me. The words hung in the air like an echo. He was sweating despite the cool temperature. We managed to start a fire around what seemed to be midday, but the sky had darkened. I tried to keep track of the time with my watch again. 3:33 p.m. flickered across the screen. Then it blinked to 2:29. Then it froze at 12 o'clock. Sophie's phone was dead as well. She cursed under her breath, saying it had been at 20% just an hour ago. Matt rummaged in his pack. He pulled out some jerky. The dryness of it looked normal, but I swear I smelled raw meat from where I stood. He took big bites, chewing very slowly, eyes never leaving Sophie. Eventually, she moved away. sitting near me and Juno. We tried to share a few bites of the small ration of granola bars left. Hunger gnawed at my stomach, but I was more disturbed than anything else. Then, late in the afternoon, Sophie said she needed to gather more wood. She offered to go alone. I wanted to go with her, but she insisted. "I just need a minute away," she whispered. She left, promising to be back in 10 minutes. As soon as she was gone, Matt turned toward me, gave this bizarre grin. "So, Ethan," he began, "Sophie told me you lost your brother last year. You left him to burn, huh?" My stomach twisted, because I'd never told Sophie exactly how Noah died. He'd been in a car crash that caused a terrible fire, but the police never found me at fault. I tried to speak, but Matt continued, "I'm sure it was a relief to watch the flames." "Shut up," I snapped, blood pounding in my ears. "Sophie wouldn't have told you that." Matt shrugged, his grin spreading, eyes unfocused. "She didn't have to. People talk, people pray, people sin." He coughed, then spat out a piece of jerky, bright red, fresh. It looked like raw flesh. My heart hammered so hard I thought I'd pass out. I instinctively reached for my hatchet, but it was in my pack. Juno began barking at him. He spat again, this time black sludge hitting the ground. Then he resumed chewing like nothing had happened. Minutes crawled by. Sophie didn't return. I was about to get up and go after her when Matt stood, towering over me. "Sit," he said, his voice layered with something else, like overlapping echoes of children crying. I froze. Juno barked and nipped at his leg. He kicked her hard enough that she yelped and stumbled back. I stood abruptly, fist clenched. "Hey, don't touch my dog." He hissed, "You taste the fear? It's so thick here." His eyes glistened black. I had no clue what to do. I felt my legs shaking. Then he turned and walked away, deeper into the forest, not bothering with a flashlight. He vanished among the trees. I rushed to Juno, checked that she was okay. Aside from being shaken, she seemed unhurt. My brain buzzed with confusion, adrenaline, and that gut-level terror that something truly unnatural was happening. I whistled softly for Sophie, listening. Silence. The wind had died, the birds never returned, and the entire world felt muffled. I forced myself to gather my gear, strapped it quickly. Then I ran in the direction Sophie had gone, calling her name. I had Juno stay on my heel. We stumbled over roots and rocks, the dusk swallowing our path. The deeper we went, the thicker the gloom. The sky above had turned a muddy purple, no real sunlight left. My watch now read 5:55. Then 6:66. Then it reset to 12 o'clock again. That final glitch nearly unhinged me. I tried to keep my mind on the mission, find Sophie and get the hell out. At last, I found her near a fallen log. She was standing, gazing upward at the canopy. Her hair looked wet, glistening even in the dark. There was a pile of sticks at her feet. I approached carefully. "Sophie?" I whispered. She turned. Her eyes were wide and unblinking, and her lips twitched as though trying to smile but not quite able to. When she spoke, her voice was hollow. "He's still burning, Ethan. You left him in the flames." A chill sank its claws into my spine. "How do you know about that? I never told you the details." She let out a strange giggle, then her face fell slack. She stepped closer, the faint starlight revealing her cheeks streaked with something dark. It looked like soot. In her hand was a piece of jagged wood, sharpened at one end. "He's burning," she repeated, "and you're going to burn too." I stumbled backward. Juno stood between us, growling. Sophie lunged, thrusting the makeshift spear. I jerked out of the way, and she caught my upper arm. Pain flared, hot blood soaking my sleeve. She muttered a frantic litany of words I couldn't fully understand, something about purging, the devil, no time. It sounded like gibberish, but each phrase was laced with malice. She raised the spear again. Juno launched herself at Sophie, jaws snapping. Sophie shrieked, the spear clattering against the ground. They scuffled. Juno bit down on Sophie's calf, causing her to cry out. With a sudden burst of superhuman speed, Sophie pulled free, pushing Juno off. Before I could react, Sophie darted off into the darkness, limping. I sank to my knees, pressing my hand to the wound on my arm. Blood pulsed between my fingers. Juno whimpered, licking at the trickle of crimson that dripped onto the leaves. I was losing track of time, drifting in and out from the shock of the injury. That's when I heard a voice behind me. A soft whisper. "How's your arm?" I whipped around. It was Matt. He stood a few feet away, face obscured by shadows. My heart pounded. I grabbed the broken spear from the ground, brandishing it as best as I could. He snickered. "You humans," he murmured, stepping into a slight beam of moonlight. His eyes were dull, as if unseeing. Then they flickered, black smoke curling at the corners of his nostrils. I realized the man standing before me wasn't Matt at all, or rather, something else wore his skin. Instinct took over. I swung the spear at him. He caught it easily, the wood lodging in his hand, but there was no reaction, no pain. He yanked it from me, tossed it aside. He grabbed me by the shirt and flung me backwards. I slammed against a tree, stars bursting in my vision. Juno snarled and lunged at him. He batted her away like a rag doll. She hit the ground with a thud, whining. He advanced on me, fists clenched. I saw the black smoke swirling behind his teeth. My mind scattered, searching for a way out. Fight or flight? My body felt heavy, pinned by raw terror. Then, out of nowhere, the snap of branches sounded from the darkness. The figure paused, turning. A flash of movement and a deer hurtled between us, bounding away in panic. That brief distraction gave me time to roll aside and grab the hatchet from my pack. When the figure turned back, I swung the hatchet with every ounce of strength I had. It struck his side, sinking in. There was a hiss, not of blood or pain, but more of that black smoke, oozing from the wound like tar. He roared, a chorus of voices, some howling, some screaming, all inhuman. I staggered away, seized Juno's collar, and forced myself to run, arm throbbing. I heard footsteps behind me, but they didn't follow far. Whether from the wound or some other reason, he let us go. I don't know how long I sprinted through those trees, half blind and delirious from blood loss. Eventually, I collapsed near a fallen trunk. Juno pawed at me, whining. I managed to strip off my jacket and tie it tight around my arm to staunch the bleeding. My body trembled with cold and fear. I tried to recall the trail. The terrain refused to match my memory. Even the shapes of the hills felt inverted, as though I'd wandered into a mirrored landscape. The faint moon above seemed to spin in the sky, sometimes vanishing altogether behind black clouds. At some point, maybe an hour later, I found a shallow cave entrance near a rocky ledge. I crawled inside, feeling safer under a roof of stone. Juno curled up next to me, and I fought to stay conscious, worried that if I fell asleep, I might never wake again. But exhaustion overcame me. I dreamed of Noah again. He was trapped in a circle of flames, screaming my name. Except his voice warped and merged into Sophie's, then Matt's. They told me I'd abandoned them, that I had a chance to save them but chose myself instead. I shouted, trying to break the ring of stones. My arms melted, black tar dripping from them, and I felt the agony of burning. When I woke, daylight, if you could call the weak, jaundiced glow daylight, trickled into the cave. My watch read 1:11, then glitched to 9:09. I had no real sense of time. My arm was stiff, the makeshift bandage soaked through, but the bleeding had stopped. Juno was lying beside me, trembling. I forced myself to my feet, rummaged in my pack for any remaining water. The container was half full, so I shared some with Juno. A wave of despair hit me. Sophie was out there either possessed or insane. Matt, whatever was wearing Matt, wanted me for something. I had no illusions now. Something demonic or supernatural was toying with us, warping time, rotting our supplies, turning living things into horrific puppets. I had to try to escape, or at least reach higher ground for perspective. But I also couldn't leave Sophie, if there was even a chance she was still alive. My mind warred between self-preservation and guilt, that same guilt that circled back to Noah. The fear that I'd let him die. I blinked away tears. I told myself I'd find Sophie or at least confirm her fate. Then I'd push on for the trailhead. I limped out of the cave with Juno at my side. As we started forward, we found footprints in the muddy patches of ground. Boot prints that seemed to belong to Sophie, and another set, heavier, that must have been Matt's. The prints led deeper into the woods toward an incline I remembered from the map. My adrenaline flared. I decided to follow them. Through twisted brush, over a small ridge, we tracked them to a clearing overshadowed by a ring of old pines. The ground there was littered with pebbles, forming shapes I didn't immediately recognize. My breath caught in my throat. In the center of that clearing, half hidden behind a boulder, was Sophie's body. I rushed over, half stumbling, and nearly retched when I saw her. She lay twisted, limbs askew, eyes wide open. Her face was streaked with ash. Her entire left side was burned as though pressed against scalding metal, and her mouth, it looked stuffed with something black. I forced myself closer. It was ash, still flaking around her lips. I choked back vomit. A part of me expected her to move to jerk upright and attack, but she was gone. Juno whimpered, nudging Sophie's hand, but there was no response. I felt a surge of anger. This was so senseless, so evil. A flicker of motion near the edge of the clearing caught my eye. I turned. A man-like silhouette stood there, horns curling from his head. I blinked, my brain refusing to process. Then he stepped forward, revealing coarse black hair and cracked coal-like skin. I realized it was no man. This was a demon, or perhaps the devil himself. This had to be Kern, the name that rattled in my dreams. I don't know how I knew, but I did. He spoke in my brother's voice. "Ethan, help me." I nearly collapsed from the shock. My breath came in short gasps. Juno barked wildly. The figure advanced, each step radiating an aura of heat. The leaves around his feet curled and blackened. "Who are you?" I managed to croak, stepping back. My voice shook. He smiled, and it was a predator's smile too wide with too many teeth. "Your regrets," he hissed. "Your guilt, your hunger for peace. I can grant it." I shook my head frantically. Everything about him reeked of malevolence. Juno lunged, barking, but an invisible force pushed her back. She whined, pinned to the ground as if by an unseen hand. My mind flashed to the hatchet. I tightened my grip on it, desperate. He chuckled. "You want to fight? Is that it?" He lifted one clawed hand, black smoke curling from his fingertips. "You mortals, and your illusions of control." He took another step, then another. I realized he was corralling me toward something on the far side of the clearing. The ring of stones, just like in my dream. In the center, an old, half-buried altar scrawled with symbols I couldn't read. A wave of dizziness hit me as I recognized one shape repeated. A circle with a slash, the same mark that had been on the tree near our first campsite. I tried to resist, to back away, but the air felt thick. My limbs were leaden. I heard faint voices again, my brother calling from the fire. Sophie laughing, Matt chanting. Everything swam. I nearly dropped the hatchet. My mind screamed at me to move, but my body was locked. Kern stepped close, towering over me by a head, horns glistening in the eerie half-light. He reached out, brushing his claw across my wounded arm. Pain flashed white-hot. I fell to one knee. He leaned in, whispering, "Stay. I can make the pain stop. I can give you your brother back." "Liar," I gasped, tears stinging my eyes. The promise tore at my heart. I'd do anything to see Noah again, to fix my regrets. But I knew, deep down, this entity wanted only to feed on my despair. He opened his mouth, revealing a swirling void of black smoke within. I felt the heat intensify as if I stood too close to a bonfire. My skin blazed with it. I thought I was done for. Then, somewhere behind me, Juno snarled. The demon's concentration wavered. I used that moment, that fraction of a second, to twist away. With all the strength I had left, I swung the hatchet upward into his side. The blade bit deep, releasing a torrent of scorching black smoke. Kern let out a roar of fury, stepping back, batting at me. His claws raked across my chest, tearing fabric and flesh. Pain erupted, but adrenaline fueled me. I pulled the hatchet free and swung again, hacking at his thigh. Another gush of smoke seethed out. Kern stumbled, bracing himself on the altar. He turned to me, eyes blazing red. "You dare?" he snarled. The ground quaked, the runes on the altar flaring with molten glow. I felt my heart pounding so violently I thought it might tear out of my ribcage. Juno lunged, jaws locking onto Kern's calf. The demon howled, flailing to shake her off. I saw my chance. I grabbed my battered canister of lantern oil from my pack. With trembling hands, I yanked the stopper, splashing the oil across the altar and onto Kern. He hissed, struggling to pry Juno free. I scrabbled for my lighter. It refused to spark on the first try. On the second, I got a flicker of flame and pressed it to the oil-soaked stone. Instantly, a burst of fire ignited, racing up Kern's body. The scream that echoed was like 100 voices shrieking at once. The demon staggered, thrashing as the flames spread. Black smoke whirled in a cyclone around him, and the runes flared so brightly I had to shield my eyes. He slammed a clawed hand into my shoulder, hurling me backwards onto the dirt. My head cracked against a rock. Stars of agony exploded across my vision. Still, I forced myself upright, ignoring the searing pain. Juno yelped, thrown aside by the demon's final convulsion. Kern flailed, stepped forward, and then collapsed against the altar, consumed by the inferno. I saw everything warp in the heat shimmer. Black smoke coiling upward like a twisted pillar. The smell of burning sulfur and flesh was unbearable. My vision blurred. The last thing I recall is toppling. My hands scraped raw against the ground, everything spinning away into darkness. I woke to the sound of a helicopter's rotor blades. I was face down in the dirt near the ring of stones. The altar was a scorched ruin, cracked in half. The day was bright, a real sunny day. My watch showed 10:22 a.m. with no glitch. Juno was lying close by, whining. Blood matted her fur, and she kept licking at a nasty cut on her side. Voices shouted overhead. Another wave of dizziness overtook me. I faintly remember seeing 2 men in rescue uniforms. I was loaded onto a stretcher, and everything faded out again. Days later, I found myself in a hospital bed. My arm was bandaged, my chest wrapped in gauze. They told me a hiker had stumbled upon me and called in help. That was all they knew. Nobody mentioned Sophie, Matt, or anything about a demon. When I tried to explain, the paramedics just gave me the sympathetic look they reserve for trauma survivors. The local sheriff's deputy took a brief statement. They never found Sophie's body or anything else out there. They chalked it up to confusion and probable dehydration. My chest wound and arm laceration were likely from a bear. For a while, I thought maybe I'd hallucinated everything. But when they gave me my belongings back, I discovered my phone's battery somehow at 80%. I turned it on. There was a single video in my gallery, time-stamped unknown. The clip was about 30 seconds. It showed me sitting near a tree in the dark, eyes wide and glassy. I was speaking, but the words that came out were layered with different voices, including what sounded like a child's sob. I said, "You brought me back," then let out a raspy laugh. I dropped the phone, cutting off the recording. I haven't slept well since. Juno recovered slowly, and I can't leave her alone for more than an hour without her whining anxiously. Every morning I wake expecting to see my watch glitch to 3:33 or 6:66. Sometimes I dream about Sophie standing in the woods, half burned, pointing a finger at me. Sometimes I see Matt's eyes, bulging and black as he chews on red meat that isn't quite jerky, and sometimes I see my brother in that circle of flames, calling for me to save him. They say I crippled a bear or some wild animal out there, but I know the truth. I crippled something else, maybe not fully destroyed it, but wounded it enough that I escaped. There's a sense of dread that it's not over, that the black smoke and horns are still in those woods, festering and waiting. I feel it in my bones. Now, as I write this, the autumn sun sets beyond my apartment window, painting the sky in shades of blood orange. Juno lies at my feet, ears perked every time I shift. She knows, maybe better than I do, that the nightmares aren't done with me. My phone is plugged in, but I haven't dared to watch that video again. Part of me wants to see if it's real, or if my mind conjured it. Part of me fears that seeing it again might open a door. Whatever happened in Frozen Head State Park, I walked away with scars that will never fade, both outside and in. And though I survived, I'm not sure if it was luck, fate, or something else. Sometimes, in the middle of the night, I jolt awake, certain I hear that moaning wind at the edge of my bed, certain I can smell sulfur, certain that if I close my eyes, I'll wake up back in that cursed clearing with no way out. I never want to step foot in those woods again, but I can't shake the feeling that it's not over, because every time the clock hits 3:33 in the morning, I feel a flicker of heat against my skin, and I see a faint swirl of black smoke in the mirror, accompanied by a single whispering voice that I can't quite place. It could be Kern's voice, or it could be my own, and it always says the same damn thing. You brought me back. My name is Josh Green. I'm 34 years old, and this happened in late October of 2025. I want to start by saying that I'm not some hardened outdoorsman. I'm not ex-military or even someone who grew up camping every weekend in the local forests. I'm an ordinary man, a freelance photographer, freshly divorced, trying to find myself in a wilderness that I thought would grant me perspective. In hindsight, I went looking for peace in the Great Smoky Mountains of Tennessee. Instead, I got a glimpse of something that I still can't explain with any logic. I chose Mount LeConte as my target destination because I'd heard it was the perfect place to capture breathtaking images of autumn foliage. The way the leaves light up in late October draws photographers from all over the country, but I didn't want the crowded trails or the well-traveled campgrounds. I wanted solitude, so I picked a rarely used route, the brushy mountain trail, which leads to the summit from a less popular direction. I had read about it in an old hiking forum. People described it as remote, serene, and not too crowded. That was exactly what I needed. I had only 2 companions on this trip, my camera, of course, and my black Labrador retriever, Max. He was 5 years old, as loyal as they come, a big softy who loved to run and play fetch, until something spooked him. In our entire time together, I had only seen Max become uneasy a handful of times, and each instance turned out to be a misinterpretation on his part, like a fallen scarecrow in a neighbor's yard or a statue in the dark. This trip, however, changed that perception. I saw a new side of him. I can't say if he sensed it before I did, but he certainly tried to warn me. I set out on a crisp Friday morning. The plan was to take 3 days, 2 nights to see the sunrise from the summit, snap my photos, and trek back. I was packing lightly but thoroughly. A sturdy tent, enough freeze-dried meals for 3 days, a small cooking pot, water filters, my camera gear, a handheld GPS, a compass, a physical map, just in case technology failed, and Max's food. My ex-wife had recently moved across the country with our daughter, and I felt like I was losing my grip on everything. This trip was supposed to clear my head and give me the mental reset I so desperately wanted. I started at the brushy mountain trailhead at about 10 a.m. The morning sunlight pierced through the canopy, illuminating the vibrant reds and oranges of the autumn leaves. I took a few shots with my camera just to test the lighting, already imagining how incredible the summit photos would be. Max bounded ahead, nose down, tail wagging, chasing after invisible critters. But only an hour into the hike, I encountered my first hurdle. My GPS froze. It showed my location pinned at the trailhead, even though I had clearly hiked a good mile or so up the path. At first, I didn't think too much of it. GPS units can glitch, especially under thick canopy or around mountainous terrain. I shrugged it off and tried to reorient myself using the physical map and compass. It was then I noticed my compass needle trembling, not just swaying from movement, but vibrating as though it couldn't decide which direction was north. I tapped it against my palm, thinking it might have become magnetized or damaged, but it didn't help. Max whined, looking back at me. I shook it off, deciding the old-fashioned way, like seeing where the sun sat in the sky, would be good enough for the time being. After all, it was a clear day, and I knew that continuing along the marked path would eventually bring me to the designated campsite near the halfway point. By midday, though, I began to suspect something was off about more than just my compass. Certain rock formations and bends in the path that my map indicated simply weren't there. In other spots, I'd see a split in the trail that didn't exist on my printed route. Perhaps the Park Service had rerouted some trails, I thought, or maybe I wasn't reading the map correctly. Frustrated, I ended up following the most worn path, trusting that it had to lead somewhere. Max grew uneasy as well. Periodically, he'd stop in the middle of the trail and just stare into the dense trees. His hackles would rise, but there was never anything there, at least nothing that I could see. By early evening, I reached what seemed to be a suitable clearing. It was level ground, large enough for a tent, and near a small creek. As I began setting up camp, Max started to circle the perimeter, sniffing and whining. That alone worried me a bit. Max rarely whined. Usually, he'd bark or run around if he caught a scent of an animal, but whining was something new. I checked to make sure there were no bee nests or animal dens around. Seeing nothing, I told myself that he was just adjusting to the unfamiliar environment. The real trouble began when I tried to light a campfire. I had brought matches, tinder, and some fire-starting gel in case the wood was damp. Despite all of that, every time I sparked a flame, it would fizzle out as though starved of oxygen. Even the tinder, bone dry, refused to catch properly. Eventually, after about 20 matches and a furious barrage of cursing on my part, a small flame took hold. But as it crackled to life, it briefly glowed a pale, almost bluish color. That fleeting moment made my skin prickle. Then it settled into a normal orangey flame. I chalked it up to some chemical or mineral in the wood. Max refused to come near the fire. Instead, he stood about 10 feet away, tail between his legs. I tried to coax him over for warmth, but he just let out this low growl, not directed at me, but at the fire itself, or maybe something behind it. I got up to check, shining my flashlight past the flickering light of the flames, but the forest around us seemed empty. The only sound was the rustle of leaves in the gentle breeze. Eventually, the sun dipped below the horizon, and the temperature dropped sharply. I huddled by the little fire, ate some of my freeze-dried meal, and fed Max. He ate quickly, then retreated to the far side of the clearing, his eyes almost reflecting a fear I'd never seen in him. That first night, my sleep was a fitful wreck. I kept drifting in and out of nightmares. In one dream, I saw myself creeping through the trees, only I was outside my own body, watching from a distance. I was holding my camera, and I raised it to my face. When I looked through the viewfinder, I saw my sleeping body next to the campfire. Then I felt something behind me, breathing against my neck, making a sound akin to a whisper, but in no language I recognized. When I jolted awake in a sweat, I found Max pressed up against the far wall of the tent. He was trembling. I tried to pet him to calm him down, but he wouldn't stop shaking for at least an hour. I must have dozed off again because the next time I opened my eyes, dawn light was filtering through the tent. My entire body felt sore, as if I'd spent the night wrestling. I reached for my sleeping bag zipper and felt the cold morning air rush in. But something was very wrong. The sleeping bag around me was slit open, as if from the inside, and the outer zipper was pulled away completely, leaving it splayed out. It looked like something with claws had torn it open to get me out, only I was still inside. The tent door, however, was zipped shut from the outside. I had no explanation for that. Max was nowhere to be seen inside the tent. My heart jumped to my throat. I scrambled out and found Max's leash still resting on the ground where I left it, but Max himself was gone. I shouted his name, looking for any sign of him. My mind raced with possibilities. Maybe he'd slipped out during the night, maybe I'd left the tent unzipped. But that didn't explain the tear in the sleeping bag or why the tent door was zipped from the outside. I frantically searched around the campsite, calling out for him. A dread I couldn't fully articulate was creeping into me. About an hour passed with no sign of Max. Then, just when I was sure I'd have to start scouring the woods, he appeared at the edge of the clearing. Relief washed over me, but it lasted only a moment. Something about him looked off. He normally trotted with his tongue lolling out and tail wagging, but now his gait was stiffer, his head bowed, and there was a weird glint in his eyes, or rather, in one of his eyes. His right eye was still the deep brown I knew. His left eye was a pale blue color. I froze, dread prickling at the back of my neck. Had I just never noticed this before? No, that was impossible. I had adoption papers noting Max's medical check. Both eyes had always been brown. Max didn't bark or whine, he just stared at me. The temperature that morning was cold, maybe in the low 40s, but I found myself sweating under my jacket. Cautiously, I approached him, speaking softly. "Max?" He made no move, just stared and occasionally blinked. Then he slowly, almost robotically, moved closer. I wanted to check him for injuries, but as I knelt, extending a hand, I saw he was trembling in that same odd, stiff way. He sniffed my hand but didn't lick or wag his tail. Swallowing my confusion and fear, I told myself it might be some weird reflection or infection. I tried to see if he had some injury on that side of his face but found no wounds. Still, that mismatched eye unnerved me. something else was different. He ate his breakfast with a near-mechanical quickness, not chewing like normal, just gulping it down. The part that really disturbed me came when I poured water into his bowl. He stared at it for a moment, then lapped it up in a manner that was almost rehearsed, as if someone had shown him how a dog was supposed to drink. Then he flicked a glance my way, and I swore his mouth curved into something close to a grin. That was enough to raise every hair on my body. Despite my instincts screaming at me to leave, I was determined to continue the trek, thinking that maybe once we got moving, the weird vibe would dissipate. I packed up camp, or tried to, because I immediately noticed that a good portion of my supplies had gone bad overnight. Even freeze-dried meals that were sealed looked moldy or somehow decayed. A strong odor of rot made me gag when I opened one of them. My canteen smelled rancid, though I had filled it with purified water the day before. I cursed, mentally calculating if I had enough edible food to continue. That day, I pushed forward. The forest seemed to actively resist my progress. The path grew narrower and less distinct, and my compass was still useless. I used the sun for guidance, but thick, rolling fog began to blanket everything. The deeper I went, the more certain I became that the forest was not normal. I'd catch glimpses of shapes behind trees, human silhouettes, or so I thought, but they never fully materialized. Whenever I tried to point my camera and snap a shot, the images turned out corrupted with weird static or large black blurs overshadowing half the frame. Checking these photos on my camera's display gave me chills. It felt like something was messing not just with my senses, but with technology itself. Throughout this time, Max followed me without complaint, but he felt like a stranger. He never wagged his tail or sniffed at bushes or did any of his usual dog behaviors. Instead, he plodded along behind or beside me, occasionally letting out these short, guttural sounds that almost resembled a cough or a grunt. At one point, I turned around to see him standing on his hind legs, leaning against a tree as if he had been standing upright. The moment our eyes met, he dropped back down to all fours. My heart hammered. Near what should have been midday, the sky grew unnaturally dark, as though dusk had fallen hours too early. I checked my watch and saw that it read 1:15 p.m., but the environment looked more like 6 p.m. in late autumn. I continued, thinking maybe I could find a decent campsite before the light vanished altogether. However, the gloom kept thickening. At some point, my watch seemed to freeze at 3:07 p.m., and even though I walked for at least another 2 hours by my estimation, the watch remained stuck at that time. Even the forest around me felt timeless, as if suspended in a drawn-out twilight. I started feeling disoriented. My internal sense of time was shot. I found another clearing by what seemed to be evening, though for all I knew it was still mid-afternoon. Exhausted and starving, I tried to make camp again. The moment I dropped my pack, Max began pacing around the perimeter, ears pinned back. Then he did something that made my stomach lurch. He barked my name. It wasn't a normal bark or a dog sound. It was more like a strangled attempt at human speech. Josh. I froze, absolutely terrified. The rational part of my mind insisted I was hallucinating out of stress, hunger, or dehydration. But the memory of that moment remains too clear. It wasn't a trick of the wind or the forest. It was my dog trying to speak my name. Desperate, I tried to light another fire. This time, the flames caught easily to my surprise, but they burned with that same bluish tinge. Max kept his distance, and that was almost a relief. I sat, hugging my knees, staring at the flames, repeating to myself that I just had to make it another day or two. I started rummaging through my camera's memory to pass the time, hoping to distract myself with the shots I had taken earlier. As I scrolled, I realized there were dozens of photos I did not remember taking. All from last night, apparently. Each image showed me sleeping, or at least lying in my sleeping bag. Some were close-ups of my face from angles that would have required the camera to be inches away. A few showed my eyes half open, with the pupils rolled back. And in several frames I noticed a figure in the background, a silhouette that was either hunched or crouched, always just out of the light. My heart thundered in my chest. Who or what had been using my camera? At some point, I dozed off from sheer exhaustion, curled near the fire. When I woke, I was lying about 50 yards from the extinguished embers, face down in the dirt. My body was so stiff that I could barely move my neck. Panic spiked through me when I realized I no longer had my pack. The clearing was in utter darkness. The only light came from a headlamp that had rolled a few feet away. My watch still read 3:07 p.m. The entire forest was silent. No insects, no nightbirds, nothing. I tried to call for Max, but my throat felt raw, like I'd been screaming. No answer came back. I scrambled to find the headlamp, turned it on, and scanned the surroundings. My pack was nowhere to be seen. The logs I'd used for the fire had been arranged in a ring, almost ritualistically, each standing on end in a circle. I shuddered, stepping away from them. Goosebumps flaring across my arms, I shouted for Max. A rustling in the brush made me wheel around, and there he stood. Or at least there something stood. It looked like Max, except now both eyes were milky white, and his mouth hung open in a silent snarl. When I pointed the headlamp at him, he bared his teeth, but it wasn't a normal dog's teeth I saw. They were too straight, too flat, almost looking human. I stumbled back, mind spinning with disbelief. He lunged before I had time to think, knocking me backward. Somehow, I managed to bring my arm up in time to keep his jaws from my face. He chomped down on my forearm, and I screamed in agony. I could feel warm blood trickling under my sleeve. Despite the pain, I shoved him off me using my leg. He skidded across the ground, making a horrible guttural shriek. I scrambled to my feet, eyes locked on him. In the glare of my headlamp, I saw him move oddly, like he was adjusting to a new body. My mind was a storm of panic and heartbreak. This was my beloved dog, or at least his shape. But I was certain, in that moment, that whatever was in front of me wasn't really Max. Something behind me rustled. I half turned to see a shape that made my blood run cold. It was me. At least, it looked like me, but not exactly. The face was too pale, the eyes too sunken, and its movements were jerky, like a broken marionette. It wore clothes identical to mine, but the colors were all wrong, bleached somehow. I caught a glimpse of the left forearm. Blood was running down it, mirroring the wound I had just gotten from that thing that looked like Max. I realized with a nauseating jolt that I was staring at something that had either copied or stolen my form. It stood maybe 10 feet away, cocking its head as if trying to figure out what I was. Then, in a voice that matched mine perfectly, it spoke, "Leave the dog. It's not yours." My heart hammered so hard it felt like it would burst. I turned back to see the dog thing advancing on me, half crawling as if hindered by the blow I'd given it. Even in the near darkness, I could see my blood dripping from its mouth. My mind screamed at me to run, but my body felt sluggish, weighed down by an overwhelming sense of dread. When I saw the dog thing gather itself to pounce again, survival instinct kicked in. I grabbed the nearest stick, an old, half-burned piece of wood from the circle. The moment the dog thing lunged, I swung with every ounce of strength in me. The stick connected with its torso, and it made a horrifying shriek that was equal parts dog yelp and human scream. It scrambled away, convulsing. My shock turned to horror as I caught a glimpse of its open mouth in the beam of the headlamp. Behind those 2 human teeth lay a second row of jagged canines, blackish and rotted. The me thing behind me advanced. I whirled, brandishing the stick like a spear. "Stay back," I shouted. It repeated after me in the same tone, the same volume, as though mocking me. Then it reached out with a trembling hand. In a blind panic, I lunged, driving the jagged, charred end of the stick straight into its chest. If it even had a heart, I aimed for that. The creature stumbled backward, letting out a hiss that sounded like sizzling air. To my horror, it deflated. Its skin hung loosely around what looked like a cluster of moving bones, but not shaped like a normal skeleton. The bones were arranged like the twisted limbs of a massive spider. One segmented appendage jutted out, hooking onto the ground as if to crawl away. I kicked it, ignoring the intense pain in my forearm, and the entire mass scuttled into the shadows, disappearing in the brush with wet, clicking sounds. My breath came in ragged gasps. I was shaking from head to toe, certain I was either losing my mind or had stumbled upon something beyond normal comprehension. The dog thing, or what used to be Max, was still there, hunched over, licking the blood from its lips. It stared at me for a moment, then turned and fled into the darkness. I didn't chase it. Part of me wanted to at least put it out of its misery, but I knew I was in no shape to fight. My forearm pulsed with sharp pain. Blood soaked my sleeve. The forest closed in around me with an eerie silence. I had to get out. That was the singular thought fueling me. Adrenaline flooding my system, I grabbed the headlamp, scanning the area for my pack. Not seeing it anywhere, I forced myself to move. Survival took precedence over supplies. My only compass was the faint sense of downhill terrain. I figured if I went downhill long enough, I might come across a road or a river that could lead me out. Staggering forward, I realized I was limping badly. At some point, I must have twisted my ankle or knee because each step on my right leg sent a jolt of pain. Still, I pressed on, my breath ragged in the chilly night air. Time lost all meaning in that fog-shrouded forest. Occasionally, my headlamp would catch the gleam of eyes in the distance, wild animals, perhaps, or something else. I tried to reassure myself that normal wildlife existed somewhere here, that not everything had turned into a monstrous imitation. My blood-soaked arm grew numb after a while, and the rest of me grew cold. The only thing that kept me going was the primal will to survive, to see another sunrise if it ever decided to come. At some point, I stumbled across a rocky outcropping that overlooked a valley. Far below, I saw a faint light, maybe the headlights of a car or a building's lamp. That tiny glimmer of hope spurred me on. I started descending a steep incline, practically sliding on my backside to keep from tumbling head over heels. My entire body was battered. Branches scratched at my face, roots threatened to twist my ankles. Eventually, I made it to flatter ground, though I had no real idea how much distance I'd covered. Then I heard it again, my own voice echoing through the trees. Josh, Josh. Drawn out, mocking. I spun in circles, shining the light. There was nothing to see except twisted trunks and swirling fog. Then came a wet snarl. The dog thing had returned, or maybe it had never really left. I tried to pick up my pace, but my injured leg made me hobble. The forest floor sloped unevenly, and I soon tripped, falling face first into mud. My headlamp flicked off on impact, leaving me in total darkness. I scrambled, patting the ground until my fingers found the headlamp again. Thankfully, it still worked when I pressed the switch, though its beam flickered weakly. The snarl sounded closer. Instinctively, I scanned behind me, and there it was. Two milky eyes, unblinking. It advanced slowly, limping as well, favoring one of its front legs. A wave of sorrow hit me, remembering how healthy Max had been just 2 days ago, but I knew that was no longer my dog. It was a hideous mockery. I lifted myself to my feet, bracing for another confrontation. My mind raced for a weapon. The only thing I had was a small folding knife in my pocket, but it was hardly enough for something like this. I braced myself, knife in hand, but the dog thing stopped advancing. It cocked its head, sniffed the air, and let out a stuttering hiss. Then it turned, as if distracted by something deeper in the woods, and bounded away, lost in the darkness. Confusion mingled with relief. Did something spook it, or did it sense that I was near the exit? My ears rang with tension, but I took that chance to move again, pushing through a wall of dense foliage. To my shock, I nearly stumbled right out onto a gravel parking lot. It looked like one of those informal pull-offs near trailheads. A single street lamp glowed at the far edge, flickering in a weak circle of light. My battered soul soared. Civilization. Safety. My mind reeled with the abruptness of going from nightmarish forest to a recognizable sign of humanity. I practically crawled toward that flickering light. That's when I saw a battered old pickup truck parked off to the side. My first coherent thought was to knock on the window or see if the keys were in it. But as I got closer, I realized the driver's side door was open. A shape slumped in the driver's seat. My heart pounded. Approaching slowly, I pointed my headlamp inside. The seat was empty. All I saw were deep claw marks in the upholstery, along with a dried pool of something that looked suspiciously like blood on the floor mat. The door's interior had been ripped in places, and the entire truck smelled foul, like a mix of rotting meat and wet fur. I backed away, scanning the lot. The only other thing I saw was a small kiosk that might display a map or park rules. Limping badly, I headed for it, heart hammering. The kiosk's glass front was cracked, and the bulletin inside was so faded that the text was barely legible. I did see Brushy Mountain Trailhead 4 miles, an arrow pointing up the road. So I had come out on some service road near the base of the mountain, maybe 4 miles from the actual trailhead. The question was, which direction did I need to go to reach a main road? I was half delirious with fatigue and blood loss. My wounded arm looked swollen, possibly infected. The forest behind me rustled. My senses screamed to keep moving, but I was teetering on the edge of collapse. Summoning the last of my willpower, I decided to follow the gravel road in what I hoped was the direction that led out. It was a bleak, lonely path, illuminated only by that single flickering lamp in the lot. Darkness swallowed everything else. Once I left the lamp's radius, I relied solely on my headlamp again, praying it wouldn't die. Stumbling along, I noticed the air felt unnaturally still. No wind, no night sounds. Then, in a split second, the forest erupted with noise. Snapping branches, rustling leaves, as if an entire herd of animals was barreling through the underbrush. My heart thudded. I scanned left and right with the headlamp, expecting to see a deer or a bear. Instead, I caught glimpses of multiple silhouettes. Humanoid but wrong. Limbs too long, joints bending in unnatural directions. They moved parallel to me, not attacking but keeping pace. Fear roared through me, and I broke into the fastest hobble run I could manage, ignoring the screaming pain in my leg. The silhouettes never lunged, never closed the gap. They just seemed to follow, occasionally letting out strange mimicry-like calls. One shouted in a voice that sounded disturbingly like my own, "Leave the dog." Another used my ex-wife's voice, calling my name with a desperate undertone. Tears streaked my face as I realized they were using my memories as weapons. I forced myself not to listen, not to let them lure me into the woods. Finally, the gravel road ended in a small paved lot. A rusted sign indicated a county road number. My chest nearly burst with relief. The moment I saw actual pavement, real asphalt, I dropped to my knees and sobbed. Yet my instincts wouldn't let me rest. I had to keep going. There was no sign of a house or any building, so I forced myself to follow the road. A few hundred yards later, I saw headlights approaching from a bend. I waved frantically, limping out into the road. The car squealed to a halt. A startled couple inside rolled down their window, eyes wide as they took in my disheveled, bloody appearance. I was half crazed, babbling about creatures in the woods. They ushered me into the back seat, gave me water, and asked if they should call an ambulance. I said yes, practically begging them to get me to a hospital or anywhere safe. As we sped away, I looked out the rear windshield. In the beam of the car's taillights, I saw a shape standing at the edge of the tree line. It was tall, bony, with eyes that reflected red. Then it vanished as the car turned a corner. The couple dropped me at the nearest hospital, about 30 miles away. I was admitted with severe blood loss, a deep laceration on my arm, and various other cuts and bruises. My story, of course, sounded like nonsense. I told them I'd been attacked by a wild animal that might have had rabies. They treated me for infection. No one believed the rest. The park rangers who visited my hospital room found no sign of what I described, though they did note that my campsite was in disarray. They chalked it up to a panicked hiker injuring himself. Max was never found. For weeks, I couldn't sleep. Nightmares plagued me. In every dream, I heard my dogs whine, saw my own face staring back at me from behind a tree. The hospital staff assumed I was traumatized, and they weren't wrong. But I knew there was more to it than just trauma. Something in those woods had twisted time, technology, even the essence of living things. Eventually, I was discharged. My arm healed with a nasty scar from the dog thing's bite. My ankle required a brace for a few months. Mentally, I was a wreck. I tried to confide in a close friend, but seeing the disbelief in his eyes made me realize how insane I sounded. So, I withdrew into myself. I sold my photography gear, moved into a small rental. The nightmares kept me awake most nights. Some days, I'd stare at a photograph of Max, both eyes brown, and wonder if he was really gone, or if that monstrosity in the forest was still wearing his face, prowling the Smokies for another victim. I managed to salvage my camera's memory card, but most of the images were corrupted or blank. Only a few vague, shadowy photos remained. A silhouette standing over me while I slept. A blurred shot of what might be a dog with one blue eye. They were enough to remind me that it hadn't been just a nightmare. Something real had happened out there. The final blow came one morning when I found a photo on my phone I didn't remember taking. It showed my bedroom from the doorway, with me in the bed, turned away from the camera. The phone data said it was taken at 3:07 a.m., the same time that had haunted my watch in the forest. I lived alone. I never heard footsteps. Yet, the next morning, the phone was lying on the nightstand, screen still lit, battery dead. I couldn't explain that. To this day, I sleep with the lights on, a baseball bat by my side, and all my doors double locked. And I check that phone every morning. That's the entire story, at least as close to reality as my mind allows me to describe it. Some nights, I almost convince myself it was all a horrible hallucination brought on by stress, fear, and maybe a bite from a rabid animal. But when I look at the scar on my arm or feel the ache in my ankle on cold mornings, I'm forced to admit that it was real. Whatever it was real, and it's still out there. So if you ever decide to wander off the beaten path in the Smoky Mountains, especially near Mount LeConte, and your dog refuses to go further, listen. Turn back, find another trail, or simply go home. Because if you don't, you might just discover, as I did, that there are places in those ancient woods where nature itself has been twisted into something vicious, hungry, and intelligent. And it wears the faces of those we love most, waiting for the moment we look away. I wish I could say I found some closure, but the truth is, the nightmares remain. I sometimes wake up in the middle of the night absolutely certain I can hear Max's paws padding around my living room. My phone might vibrate at 3:07 a.m. with a no-caller ID message that reads only static. Each time, I find myself trembling, thinking of that rotting shape that wore my dog's face, that twisted thing that looked like me. Despite the terror, a tiny corner of my mind wonders if maybe, just maybe, the real Max escaped somehow, free of that corruption. But I know that's wishful thinking. Those mountains took him from me, replaced him with a living nightmare. So that's all I have. Believe it or don't. I've shared it only in the hope that it might keep someone else from ignoring that first warning sign, from pressing deeper into a place where the boundaries of time and identity break down. Because I learned the hard way. Sometimes the dog won't go any further because it senses that the forest is no longer just trees and wildlife. It's become an entity in and of itself, one that preys upon your trust, your love, your memories, and leaves you forever doubting what's real, what's alive, and what's just wearing a face like a stolen disguise. I'm Josh Green, and I barely survived the Smoky Mountains in October 2025. I gave up the dream of capturing the perfect sunrise photo. My advice to you is simple. Don't go searching for a revelation in those remote trails. You might find only horror, or worse, your own reflection, staring back at you with a face you no longer recognize. My name is Ethan Carter. I'm 41 years old, and this happened in August of 2025. I'm writing this down because I can't sleep most nights without seeing the things I saw out there, and I want someone, anyone, to understand that I didn't just lose my mind. I didn't hallucinate all of this. My hope is that putting the story in words might keep me grounded in reality, or at least help me come to terms with whatever I witnessed. If my account ever helps someone else avoid the fate I almost suffered, then it will have been worth sharing. I should start by explaining a bit about myself. I'm a mechanic by trade and a drifter at heart. After my mother passed away 4 years ago, and with no siblings or remaining close family to keep me tethered, I bought an old Class C RV and decided to roam the country. Fixing engines, changing tires, and patching up vehicles gave me enough money to cover gas and groceries. I liked the open road. I relished the quiet. There's a certain solace in being alone, free from the entanglements that break your heart. That said, I've always had a deep respect for nature, and a healthy fear of it. I'm not a rookie who wanders into unknown terrain without caution. So, when I set my sights on Great Basin National Park in Nevada, I did my homework. I read about the main attractions, Lehman Caves, Wheeler Peak, and the desert's harsh climate. I paid attention to advisories about brutal temperatures in the day and sharp drops at night. I checked the forecast. I thought I knew what I was in for. What drew me there specifically was a mention I found in an online forum about a remote spot called Ruin Rock Campground. The name was intriguing, and the post described it as so isolated you'll wonder if you're the last person on Earth. To me, that sounded perfect. I wanted a quiet place to park my RV, reflect on life, maybe do a little stargazing in the crystal-clear desert sky. I'd grown tired of typical campgrounds packed with families, yelling kids, and bright lanterns that drowned out the stars. Ruin Rock was supposed to offer real solitude. I arrived in the general vicinity of the Great Basin area on a scorching afternoon. My RV, a battered old Gulfstream, rattled noisily over a winding 2-lane highway that cut through miles of desert scrub. Heat shimmered above the asphalt, creating mirages of water that vanished the moment I got close. Dust devils spiraled lazily off in the distance. The nearest actual town was almost 30 miles behind me, a tiny place called Baker, if memory serves right. I'd stocked up there on groceries, extra water, and gas. A helpful store clerk had given me directions to the official park entrance, which was straightforward enough. But once I got inside the park, I'd have to rely on a combination of outdated signage, my phone's map, and a half-remembered forum post to locate Ruin Rock. My phone quickly lost signal about a mile into the park's boundaries. Not ideal, but not unexpected. The official roads were mostly paved, but I found a single offshoot that turned into cracked asphalt, then eventually gravel, and finally dirt. A tattered sign pointed the way. Ruin Rock, 12 miles. Perfect. I followed it, the RV jostling and complaining as I navigated potholes and the occasional washboard ripple. The desert here was eerie in its emptiness. A scattering of sagebrush, the occasional stunted juniper, and beyond that, rolling hills that looked like petrified waves of earth. A fierce sun glared overhead, making me squint even behind my sunglasses. After an hour or so, I came across something you might call the entrance to Ruin Rock. A small wooden kiosk stood to one side, half collapsed, with nothing but a faded campground ahead notice that had probably been typed up in the 80s. Beyond that, the dirt road got rougher, but I pushed on. With my mechanical skills, I'd kept the RV in decent shape. It could handle moderate off-road conditions as long as I took it slow. Eventually, I topped a low ridge and saw what looked like the designated camping area. There were maybe 3 or 4 overgrown pull-through sites, each spaced far apart. Not a soul in sight. No tents, no other RVs, not even a parked car. I'll admit, I felt a surge of excitement. I'd gotten what I came for, perfect isolation. Glancing at my watch, I saw it was a little past 5 p.m. The sun still hung high, but I knew from my research that it would drop behind the mountains quickly, and the desert nights could be brutally cold. I chose a site that seemed the most level, near a small patch of stunted pinyon pines. The wind was picking up, stirring dust clouds around me. I turned off the engine and stepped outside to stretch my legs, scanning the horizon. The land was mostly flat out here, though to the northeast rose a towering ridge of reddish rock, maybe the ruin that gave the place its name. It did resemble the crumbled walls of some ancient fortress if you looked at it from the right angle. I figured I'd hike out there the next day for some exploration. Maybe snap a few photos on my phone to share whenever I got back in range of a cell tower. First things first, I set up camp. My RV had a small awning that I cranked out, then I laid out a foldable chair. I double-checked my water supply and tossed some perishable groceries into the mini-fridge, turned on the propane to get the fridge running, and prepared a quick meal. The dryness of the desert air made me chug water faster than usual. By the time I'd finished eating, the sun had dipped low enough to cast long shadows across the red-brown sand. The temperature dropped noticeably, though the day's heat still radiated off the ground. As I was cleaning up, I heard something rustle behind me. Instinctively, I turned, expecting maybe a jackrabbit or a coyote. Instead, I saw a man, an older fellow, standing about 30 feet away near a scraggly bush. He was dressed in dusty jeans, worn boots, and an old straw hat. His posture was hunched, and he had one hand in his pocket. The other hand held a walking stick of sorts, though it looked more decorative than practical. I was startled. I hadn't seen any vehicle or sign of another person for miles. It's like he just appeared out of thin air, but I tried not to seem startled. "Hey there," I called. "Didn't see you arrive." He lifted a hand in greeting, but he didn't smile. His face was gaunt, with sharp cheekbones and eyes that seemed too dark in the fading light. "Evenin'," he replied, voice slightly raspy. I took a few steps toward him, staying in the open. "I'm Ethan," I said. "You camping here as well?" He nodded slowly, though I didn't see any campsite or vehicle of his. "Name's Victor," he offered. "Used to live out this way." He gestured vaguely toward the rocky ridge. Haven't seen many folks make it to Ruin Rock since they closed the main road. I glanced around, trying to hide my confusion. So, do you have a tent or a vehicle, or... He waved me off with a crooked grin. I get by. Used to be a ranger here years ago, back when folks came out more regular. You be careful though, people don't realize how quick the desert can swallow you up. Something about him set me on edge, but I chalked it up to the unease of an unexpected visitor in an isolated spot. The desert can attract all kinds of drifters. Still, it was only polite to offer him some water. I've got a few spare bottles if you need any. He shook his head. I'm fine, but keep your eyes open out here, Ethan. The desert has a way of showing you things you might not be ready to see. Before I could press him on what he meant, he turned and walked off around the side of my RV, heading in the direction of the ridge. I moved after him, perplexed, but by the time I reached the back of the RV, he was gone. It was as if he'd vanished behind that bush, or the wind had carried him away. I felt a prickle of unease. There was nowhere for him to hide, flat land in every direction, yet no sign of footprints, no dust trail, nothing. I scanned the horizon, but the desert was silent. "Hey, Victor?" I called. No reply. Eventually, I gave up. The sky was dimming, stars starting to blink into view. A real part of me wanted to pack up and drive back to a more populated campsite, or maybe even out of the park entirely, but I brushed aside the fear. The man was probably a local with a good knowledge of the land. Maybe he really had been a ranger once, or maybe he was homeless. It didn't necessarily mean he was a threat. I told myself I was being paranoid. I set a small portable lantern on the folding table outside the RV and decided to watch the sun finish its descent. The Great Basin is known for its spectacular night skies, and they weren't kidding. Once the light faded, the stars came out in droves. For a few minutes, I almost forgot my worries. The Milky Way arched overhead, a bright band of cosmic dust. The only sound was the wind, which whistled around the corners of my RV. Soon the temperature dropped enough that I considered going inside for warmth. But as I gathered my chair and shut the awning, I heard what I can only describe as a faint whisper. It sounded like someone saying my name, Ethan, carried on the breeze. I froze, scanning the darkness. The lantern's glow cast a feeble circle of light, leaving the rest of the desert in inky blackness. No sign of Victor or anyone else. My breath hitched. Then it came again, softer. Ethan. An icy knot formed in my stomach. Everything in me wanted to race into the RV and lock the door, but I forced myself to step toward the sound, shining my flashlight across the scrub. Nothing. Just rolling sand in the distant silhouette of that ridge. After a moment, the whispering stopped. I muttered a curse under my breath and hurried inside, locking the door. I made sure all the windows were latched. It was about 9 p.m. by my phone's clock, which had no service but could at least tell me the time. My plan was to get some rest and leave in the morning. I told myself I'd do a bit of exploring on foot, see if Ruin Rock Campground really had anything special to offer. Then, if the weirdness persisted, I'd drive out. Simple enough. I lay down on the RV's small bed, the desert's quiet pressing in on me. After about an hour of tossing and turning, I drifted off to uneasy sleep, lulled by the faint hum of the fridge and the wind brushing against the RV's exterior. I dreamt of footprints in the sand, footprints that weren't mine, forming a circle around my RV. In that dream, I was outside, and I watched as dozens of footprints appeared, each set slightly deeper than the last, as if something heavy was pacing around me, invisible in the starlight. Then, in the distance, I saw a figure that looked like Victor, except he had no eyes, just two empty sockets. He smiled a crooked grin and lifted a hand in greeting. The desert around us flickered like a dying light bulb. I tried to move, but I couldn't. My feet sank into the sand like quicksand, and I was paralyzed. Then he spoke. His voice layered with what sounded like 2 or 3 voices at once. "It's your turn, Ethan." I jolted awake, soaked in sweat. The inside of the RV felt suffocating, the air stale and hot. My phone said it was 3:13 a.m. I flicked on a small reading lamp, trying to calm my nerves. The dream had rattled me more than I cared to admit. For a brief moment, I considered just firing up the engine and leaving right then. But the thought of navigating that rough dirt road in the pitch-black desert, half asleep, wasn't appealing. Besides, my rational side insisted it was only a nightmare. I forced myself to lie back down, eventually drifting into a shallow sleep until the first hints of dawn. Morning came, and with it, a feeble sense of relief. I stepped outside to find the desert bright and harsh, with the sun cresting the eastern horizon. A wave of heat hit me even at that early hour. I made some coffee with the small stove in the RV and sipped it in my folding chair, scanning for any sign of Victor or other people. Nothing. The place was as empty as it had been. In broad daylight, the night's fears receded a bit. Maybe it really was just my mind playing tricks. The dryness, the isolation, the unsettling presence of that old man, it could all feed nightmares. Determined to salvage my trip, I packed a small backpack with water, snacks, and a flashlight just in case. My plan was to hike over to the rocky ridge that presumably gave Ruin Rock Campground its name. If it was as interesting as the forum suggested, maybe I'd have some pictures to show for my efforts. Then, I'd decide whether to stay another night or head out. Walking in the desert sun was punishing. The ground reflected heat back at me, and the air felt like it could peel the skin off my face. I moved slowly, pacing myself, draining water steadily. The ridge looked closer than it really was, a common mirage effect in wide-open terrain. After about 45 minutes of trudging, I reached its base. Up close, the formation did look a bit like tumbled ruins, huge slabs of rock layered in jagged steps. Exploring its shadows brought immediate relief from the sun. That's when I spotted what might have been a narrow path winding upward. My curiosity piqued. This wasn't on any map I'd seen. Carefully, I started up the natural steps, sidestepping gravel and loose stones. The going was tough, and I had to use my hands at times to brace myself. About halfway up, I found a shallow cave or alcove in the rock. Its opening was partially hidden by a large boulder. Inside, the air was cool and still, and the walls bore faint markings, symbols I couldn't quite decipher. They looked ancient, like petroglyphs. Curving lines, some that resembled spirals, others that looked like tall stick figures with outstretched arms. I snapped a few pictures with my phone, wishing I had a better camera. Who knows if they were real petroglyphs or just graffiti from bored campers decades ago? But something about them felt old and a little forbidding. I shrugged off the unease and turned to leave, only to almost run face first into none other than Victor. He stood in the cave entrance, blocking the light. How he got there without me hearing him, I had no clue. My heartbeat hammered in my chest. "Jesus," I gasped. "You scared the hell out of me. What are you doing up here?" He tilted his head. "You ask a lot of questions, Ethan. I've been around these parts a long time. This place," he gestured at the walls, "older than you can imagine. Good folk used to live nearby, but they're mostly gone now. You come here alone." I hesitated, feeling a jolt of paranoia. Why was he asking me that? "I'm just passing through," I said carefully. "I like exploring. I didn't realize anyone still lived out here." His eyes flicked to the markings. "People left behind pieces of themselves," he said cryptically. "Sometimes I think the desert took more from them than it gave. A bead of sweat trickled down my temple, though the cave was cool. Something about the way he said that made my skin crawl. Well, I should probably get back, I managed. It's a hot hike. He stepped aside, letting me pass with surprising politeness. Maybe I'll see you around. The day's not done yet. He offered a thin smile that never reached his eyes. I edged past him, skirting the boulder. Outside, the sun blinded me momentarily. When I glanced back, Victor was gone. No footsteps, no sign. Again. It took me a minute to quell the rising panic. Was I dealing with a real person, or was something else at play? Part of me was furious with myself for feeling frightened, for letting superstition tangle my thoughts. Another part of me recognized that something was deeply amiss. I hustled down the ridge, half expecting to be followed, but the desert was silent. When I finally reached the flat ground at the base, I realized I was breathing hard in fear more than physical exertion. I needed to calm down. Maybe the old man was just eccentric and had ways to traverse the terrain quietly. People can be weird. But the rational explanation didn't fully soothe my nerves. By the time I made it back to my RV, the sun was high and scorching. I guzzled water and checked my watch. It read 12:22 p.m. My phone, of course, had no signal. I considered heading out immediately, but my curiosity nagged me. Despite the eerie encounters, there was something about Ruin Rock that felt incomplete. Besides, I was exhausted and needed a break before tackling the long dirt road out. After a quick meal, I holed up in the RV to avoid the midday heat. I turned on the overhead vent fan, opened a window for cross breeze, and lay down, letting my mind wander. I must have dozed off because the next thing I knew I was startled awake by a banging noise on the side of the RV. Bolting upright, I checked my watch. 3:47 p.m. I'd been out for over 3 hours. Heart pounding, I crept to the window. Nothing but empty desert and swirling dust. Another bang came from the opposite side near the rear. I scurried to that window, still nothing. A chill crept down my spine. The rational part of me suspected wind-blown debris. Maybe a stray tumbleweed or a branch. But the pattern of bangs sounded deliberate too, spaced out. Gathering my nerve, I unlocked the door and stepped outside. The afternoon light was hazy, as if filtered through a thin veil of dust. No sign of Victor or anyone else. The ground around the RV looked undisturbed, no fresh footprints. I circled the vehicle. On the driver's side, near the rear, I found 4 distinct scratches in the paint, each about a foot long, arranged in parallel. My stomach flipped. They looked like claw marks, though far too large for something like a coyote or bobcat. The metal was gouged, curling at the edges. I gently touched the scratches, and a flake of paint fell away, exposing bare metal beneath. "Victor!" I yelled, voice echoing in the dry air. "Is this some kind of sick joke?" Silence. I kicked the dirt, frustration and fear mixing in my gut. My instinct was screaming now. Leave. Go. This place isn't right. I decided I'd bail as soon as possible. Enough sightseeing. I hopped into the driver's seat, turned the ignition, and pressed the starter. The engine sputtered, coughed, then died. I tried again, same result. "Come on," I muttered, pumping the gas. Nothing but coughing. I popped the hood to check the engine. I'm no novice, but what I saw baffled me. The spark plug wires looked frayed, almost melted. They'd been fine earlier. Granted, desert heat can be intense, but this was more than heat damage. It looked like something had gnawed or clawed at them. Furious, I rummaged through my toolkit hoping I had spares. I found one partial set, not ideal, but workable if I could splice them properly. It'd take time, though. Time I'd rather have spent on the road. I got to work, hands trembling with adrenaline. Every few minutes I glanced over my shoulder, half expecting to see Victor standing there, or some unknown figure lurking. The desert was silent except for a faint rustling wind. After what felt like forever, I managed a makeshift repair. The sun was sliding toward the horizon. My watch read 5:10 p.m. I hopped back into the driver's seat and tried the ignition once more. The engine whined, but still wouldn't turn over. Something else was wrong. Popping the hood again, I spotted an empty reservoir. My coolant was gone. Checking around the engine, I found no major leaks. It was as if the coolant had vanished. No puddle under the RV, no sign of spillage on the engine block. I felt a wave of anger and despair. Even if I had spare coolant, if some unknown sabotage was happening, I might be stuck. Searching my supplies, I realized I didn't have nearly enough coolant to refill the system. I could try water as a temporary measure, but I also needed water for drinking. I was caught in a dilemma: risk the engine overheating or risk dehydration. I decided to wait until morning, hoping the cooler nighttime temperature might allow me to drive out at a slow pace without the engine overheating too quickly. If I left now, I'd likely end up stranded in the dark. At least here I had some semblance of shelter. That knowledge didn't do much to ease my nerves. As dusk approached, I realized how quickly the atmosphere changed. The wind died, and an oppressive stillness took hold, as if the land itself was holding its breath. The sun melted into the horizon, painting the desert in lurid oranges and reds. Long shadows stretched toward my RV, creeping across the ground like grasping fingers. I felt pinned there, a captive to the very place I once sought for its loneliness. That evening, I didn't bother setting up a chair outside. I locked myself in the RV, triple-checking every window and door. My mind replayed the events: the strange old man, the whispers, the dream of footprints, the scratches on my RV, the sabotage to my engine. Logic told me there had to be a mundane explanation, perhaps a local vandal or even an animal, but my gut insisted something else was at work. At around 8 p.m., the wind picked up again, rattling the RV. My overhead light flickered. Then the fridge gave a strange rumble. I realized the propane flow might be acting up, so I double-checked the lines. That's when the fridge died altogether. No light, no hum. Everything else in the RV seemed fine, so it wasn't a total power issue. As I fiddled with the fridge's wiring, my phone lit up in my pocket, startling me. I pulled it out. The screen displayed an incoming call from an unknown number. I stared, baffled. I hadn't had cell service here, and certainly not enough for a call. A jolt of hope shot through me. Maybe I had service again. I accepted the call, pressing the phone to my ear. Static greeted me, along with faint voices in the background. "Hello," I said, voice shaking. "Who is this?" More static, then something like a low growl. Words? I couldn't tell. They were muffled, distant. I caught my name, Ethan, drawn out and distorted. Then the line crackled and went dead. My phone displayed no service again, no sign of the call in my logs. I felt the phone slip from my sweaty palm onto the floor. That was the final straw. I grabbed a flashlight and rummaged through the compartments for extra coolant or water. I'd make the engine run, if only for an hour, enough to get me out of this damned place. Even if I ruined the engine, it'd be better than staying. I found a few plastic jugs of water. Using a funnel, I poured them into the coolant reservoir, praying it would keep the engine from immediate meltdown. Then I marched to the driver's seat, determined to leave. I turned the key. The engine coughed, sputtered, but roared to life. Relief flooded me. Without waiting for the temperature gauge to move, I put it in drive and rolled forward, heading back down the dirt road. My headlights cut through the darkness, illuminating swirling dust motes. The night sky overhead was pitch black, no moon that I could see. The bumpy road forced me to go slow, but I was moving. I told myself I'd keep going no matter what. After about 15 minutes, I reached the battered kiosk that had once read Ruin Rock Campground, 12 miles. Good. That meant I was heading in the right direction. Another mile or two and I'd hit the main gravel, then eventually the paved road. I just had to keep going, keep the engine cool. I peered at the temperature gauge. It was rising alarmingly fast. I slowed even more, letting the engine idle along at a crawl. Each second felt like a lifetime. All at once, the headlights flickered and the engine sputtered. I pumped the gas lightly, urging it forward. The headlights brightened again, revealing a figure standing in the middle of the road. My foot slammed on the brake, the RV lurching to a halt. There, illuminated in the cone of yellow light, stood Victor. He held his walking stick, hat tilted low, face partially hidden. I shouted through the windshield, my voice echoing in the enclosed cabin. "Get out of the way!" My pulse thundered. I half expected him to vanish like before, but he didn't move. Instead, he lifted his head, revealing his eyes. They glowed faintly, reflecting the headlights. He mouthed something I couldn't hear, then took a step forward. A surge of dread paralyzed me. The rational part of my mind screamed to just swerve and drive around, but fear rooted me in place. He raised a hand in a calm, almost gentle gesture. Then my engine died with a terrible clunk. The headlights shut off, plunging everything into darkness. I flipped the ignition switch, but nothing happened. No click, no lights on the dash. It was as if the RV's entire electrical system had been drained. My flashlight was on the passenger seat, so I groped for it in the dark, my breath ragged. When I flicked it on, the beam cut a small circle of light through the windshield. Victor was gone. My heart hammered so loud I could hear it in my ears. I cracked the driver's side window, shining my flashlight outside. Nothing. Just the hush of desert night. Swallowing my terror, I forced myself to exit the RV. The stillness of the night pressed in around me. The temperature felt near freezing, a dramatic shift from the day's heat. My breath misted in the beam of the flashlight. I circled the RV, shining the light on the engine compartment. Checking the wiring, I saw no new damage. But the coolant reservoir was bone dry, as though I never filled it. The hose I'd used to funnel water was missing. Furious and terrified, I looked around for footprints. The ground was mostly hard-packed dirt, so I couldn't see much. Then, behind me, I heard gravel crunch. I swung the flashlight around. A shape flitted just out of reach of the beam, disappearing behind a small rise. My instincts told me it was Victor, or whatever Victor truly was. I had no illusions about outrunning anything in this desert at night, but I also knew staying put was a dead end. With the RV kaput, I had nowhere else to go. I grabbed a tire iron from the back storage compartment, a poor excuse for a weapon, but it was all I had. Then I set off after the figure, adrenaline drowning out my common sense. My plan, though plan might be too generous a word, was to confront him, demand he undo whatever he'd done, or at least, find answers. Maybe it was desperation. Maybe I just couldn't handle feeling so powerless. The dirt road gave way to uneven ground. I stumbled on rocks, cacti pricking at my ankles. The flashlight bobbed wildly, casting erratic shadows. My breathing ragged, I kept moving forward, scanning for any movement. The desert was eerily quiet, no wind, no wildlife sounds. Suddenly, a voice echoed, "Ethan!" I whipped the flashlight in the direction. Empty air. Then, from the opposite side, the voice came again, "Ethan, over here." My heart hammered. It was Victor's voice. Or was it? The tone was pitched higher, mockingly playful. I edged forward, trying to keep a handle on my fear. Then I saw him standing on a small rise, silhouetted against the starry sky. He lifted a hand in greeting. "You're lost," he called. "I can show you the way." The bitterness in my voice surprised even me. "Stop messing with me," I yelled, brandishing the tire iron. "I just want to leave. Let me go." He let out a wheezing laugh, stepping closer. My flashlight revealed his face, still gaunt, eyes dark. He raised the walking stick and pointed it at me. "It's not me keeping you here," he said softly. "You came looking for emptiness, didn't you? Sometimes emptiness finds you first." Shadows shifted around him, and I saw fleeting shapes like figures half-formed from the night. They flickered in my peripheral vision, maybe half a dozen or more. They seemed almost transparent, or at least cloaked in darkness. The hair on my neck stood up. Every fiber of my being screamed that I was witnessing something beyond normal comprehension. I opened my mouth to speak, but no words came out. One of the shadowy figures drifted toward me, elongated arms reaching. My flashlight flickered. I flailed the tire iron at empty air. Victor tilted his head as though studying me. "You can't fight the desert," he whispered, stepping forward. "It devours. All that remain are echoes." My chest tightened. Summoning my courage, I lunged, swinging the tire iron at him. I expected him to dodge or vanish, but instead, he dropped the walking stick and caught my wrist in a grip of steel. His hand felt cold, unnaturally so. I gasped at the strength behind it. A moment later, a pulse of dizziness overwhelmed me, and I collapsed to my knees. My flashlight rolled away, illuminating the swirling dust. The shadows circled closer. I heard voices, some male, some female, some that sounded like children. They whispered my name, repeated phrases I couldn't make out, layering on top of each other in a dissonant chorus. Victor crouched, grabbing my face with one hand, forcing me to look at him. His eyes were black pits reflecting stars but no human warmth. "Give in," he said, voice resonating with a low hum. "All wanderers do." I thought of my mother, of the life I'd left behind when she died, of the regrets I carried. A flicker of rebellion flared in me. I wasn't ready to be consumed by desert ghosts. I tried to pull free, but Victor's hold was unyielding. Something black and mist-like seeped from his sleeves, swirling around my wrists like tendrils. Then, out of nowhere, a gust of wind kicked up, swirling sand into a miniature dust storm around us. The shapes recoiled, flickering like illusions. Victor staggered, loosening his grip. I wrenched free, adrenaline surging. Stumbling to my feet, I grabbed the flashlight, angled it at his face. He let out a hiss, shielding his eyes. The swirling sand built into a stinging gale, forcing me to turn away. By the time I dared to look back, the wind had died, and Victor was gone, vanished as if the desert had swallowed him. I coughed, spitting out grit, mind racing. Every part of my body trembled. But my momentary chance was here. If he was gone, maybe I could get back to the RV and figure out some other plan. I turned in circles until I spotted the faint shape of my RV in the distance, a dull silhouette in the starlight. I moved as fast as I dared, stumbling over uneven ground, fighting off the panic that threatened to paralyze me. When I reached the RV, I locked myself inside, panting heavily. My mind was a whirlwind of fear and confusion. The battery was still dead, the engine useless, and I had no phone signal. I dug out a couple of flare guns from an emergency kit I'd collected over years of traveling. They were my last resort, meant for mountain passes or ocean roadsides. Firing one might signal someone, if there was anyone out there to see it. Clutching a flare gun, I climbed onto the RV's roof. The night air bit at my skin, the wind having died down again. Above me stretched the vast desert sky, billions of stars mocking me with their beauty. A lump swelled in my throat. With trembling hands, I aimed the flare gun and pulled the trigger. A bright red flame shot upward, arcing into the sky before descending in a slow burn. It cast the desert in a ghastly red glow for a moment. Then darkness returned. No immediate response. I waited 10 minutes, then fired another, sweeping the horizon with my flashlight. Nothing. For a moment, I thought I saw a flicker of movement out by the kiosk. The beam of my flashlight just caught the shape of a figure, or several, drifting around. Then they were gone. I stayed on the roof for another hour, shivering in the cold, hoping against hope for someone to come. No headlights, no search helicopter. I was alone. At some point, exhaustion overwhelmed me. I climbed back inside, barricading the door with what I could: chairs, a portable cooler, the tire iron. I huddled in a corner, dozing off in fits, gun in hand. My dreams were nightmares of Victor's eyes and shifting shadows beckoning me to join them. Eventually, morning light crept through the windows, rousing me. I rubbed my gritty eyes, feeling a dull ache in every joint. Sore and desperate, I rummaged for whatever water and food I had left, then forced down a small breakfast. I had to walk out. There was no other choice. My RV was out of commission, my phone useless. The next real sign of civilization was at least 10 miles away, maybe more. But I had sturdy boots and a backpack with some supplies. If I got an early start, I could cover a good chunk of ground before the midday heat peaked. With shaky determination, I set off, leaving the RV behind. The desert spread before me, indifferent and vast. Each step felt like a step away from madness, or perhaps deeper into it. I walked along what was left of the dirt road, the morning sun already blazing. Every time I glanced back, the RV looked smaller, like a child's toy perched on lifeless earth. Hours passed. My canteen emptied faster than I liked. The sun beat down, punishing me. My watch read 10:45 a.m., then 11:15, then 12:30. By 1 p.m., I was delirious with heat. My lips cracked, and my throat felt like sandpaper. Yet, no sign of the main road or any other vehicles. The desert shimmered, mirages floating in the distance. Once, I thought I saw a car parked ahead, but as I drew near, it vanished, leaving only heat-blurred dunes. I collapsed near a scrubby bush for shade around 2 p.m., panting. The water was nearly gone. My body was giving out. A creeping panic told me I might die here alone, another ghost for the desert. That's when I heard it. A faint rumble, the sound of an engine. I lifted my head, straining to listen. Yes, definitely an engine. I scrambled upright, ignoring the dizziness. A cloud of dust appeared on the horizon, growing larger. It looked like a pickup truck. I stumbled onto the middle of the road, waving my arms frantically. The truck screeched to a halt about 50 yards away. A man in a baseball cap leaned out the window, eyes wide. "You okay, friend?" he called. Relief and gratitude surged through me so powerfully I nearly cried. "My RV broke down," I croaked. "Need help, water, please." He hopped out, rummaged in the bed of his truck, and returned with a half-full gallon jug of water. I drank greedily, the cool liquid feeling like life itself. He introduced himself as Todd. He'd been hunting for arrowheads or something along the back roads when he spotted me. I explained the gist: engine trouble, no cell service, and asked if he could take me to the nearest help. "Yeah, sure," Todd said, seeming concerned. "We can get you to a station in Baker. You look real beat up." I climbed into his truck, glancing back at the empty desert road. No sign of Victor or those shadows. "Thank you," I managed, voice shaking. Then we pulled away, leaving Ruin Rock behind. My head swirled with relief, fear, and an odd, lingering sadness. After a couple of miles, Todd noticed my trembling and asked if I was all right. I told him bits of the story, broken coolant lines, scratched RV, an old man named Victor. Todd gave me a look that was equal parts skeptical and alarmed. He shook his head. "Never heard of a caretaker or ranger named Victor out here," he said. "But these desert roads can attract all sorts of folks. Meth labs, weird cults. You never know." I nodded, not wanting to argue. Maybe it was better if he chalked it up to vagrants or criminals. The real explanation was beyond anything rational. As we drove, I caught sight of a sign that read, "Ruin Rock Campground, 12 miles." The same battered sign I'd passed before. My sense of direction told me we should be heading away from that sign, but I didn't question Todd. Maybe the roads looped around in odd ways. We eventually reached a junction that connected to a paved highway. The wave of relief that hit me was immense. Civilization, blacktop road markings, the promise of towns and cell towers. Todd called me lucky to be found. I nodded mutely, mind swirling with the memory of Victor's eyes and the whispers in the night. Once in Baker, Todd dropped me at a small service station. I used a payphone to call a tow for my RV, which, after a few days of searching, apparently couldn't be located by the towing company. They found the kiosk sign, found the approximate area, but no sign of my RV. It was as if it vanished into the desert. I argued with them, provided the exact coordinates to the best of my knowledge, but they turned up nothing. The entire incident baffled them. Eventually, I gave up. My insurance claim was a nightmare, but that hardly mattered next to the terror I'd experienced. For a few days, I crashed in a cheap motel, trying to piece myself together. I scoured the internet for any mention of a ranger named Victor or reported hauntings in Ruin Rock Campground. Almost nothing came up, just a scattering of old articles referencing the place's closure due to lack of funding and a few accidents. No mention of anything supernatural. I left Baker soon after, hitching a ride to a bigger town. I wanted to be as far from Nevada's deserts as possible. That's the story. Maybe you don't believe me. I don't blame you. If I hadn't lived it, I might dismiss it as a hallucination or some elaborate hoax. But I'm the one who woke up with nightmares of black-eyed men and swirling shapes in the desert night. I'm the one who can't explain where my RV went, or how the scratches on the side panel got there, or how an old man could appear and vanish at will. I'm the one who experiences a jolt of terror every time I drive into a wide-open space. So, to anyone reading this, if you ever find yourself drawn to a place that promises absolute solitude and silence, be careful. Sometimes solitude is a trap, and silence can hold voices you're not meant to hear. The desert doesn't care about your reasoning or your illusions of control. It's a place that can reveal your deepest fears, or create them anew. Oh, and if a man named Victor ever greets you, or if you hear whispers on the wind calling your name, remember my story. Turn around, get back in your car, and drive until the desert is far behind you. Because what lies out there isn't a scenic wonder, or even a typical haunting. It's something older, hungry for your presence. It devours. And once it has your scent, it doesn't easily let go.